What happens when the most powerful woman in the room decides she wants the one man who never once tried to impress her? Ethan Cross didn't own a yacht. He didn't own a second car. Some weeks he wasn't sure he'd make rent. But Victoria Sterling, whose face appeared on the cover of Forbes 3 years running, kept showing up at his front door anyway. And the worst part? He had no idea why. This is a story about the thing money can't explain, the wound that never fully closes, and the moment a man finally stops believing the worst voice in his head, the one that belongs to someone who never deserved to be there. Stay until the end, hit like, drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. The morning started the way most of Ethan's mornings started, slightly behind schedule and already apologizing for it. He was standing at the kitchen counter in a faded gray t-shirt, pouring cereal into a bowl with one hand and scrolling through a work email with the other, when his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, walked in wearing one shoe and carrying the other, like evidence of a crime. "Dad," she held up the shoe. "There's something in the other one." Ethan set down his phone. What kind of something? A feeling. He stared at her. A feeling. Like a lump feeling, not a bug feeling. I checked. He crouched down, took the shoe, and turned it upside down. A small, dried-up rubber eraser from a pencil fell onto the tile floor. Pink. Star-shaped. "That's been in there since Tuesday," Lily said, nodding seriously. "And you're just telling me this now?" "I forgot about the feeling until just now." Ethan handed her the shoe. "Put it on. You've got 8 minutes." She sat on the kitchen floor and started wrestling with the Velcro straps. And Ethan turned back to his cereal, which had gone soggy, and his email, which was asking him to come in 45 minutes early for a team meeting that should have been a text message. He read it twice, exhaled slowly through his nose, and put his phone face down on the counter. It was Thursday, October. The kind of Ohio morning where the sky couldn't decide between gray and pale blue and had settled, unhelpfully, on both. Ethan Cross was 32 years old. He worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction firm called Harlan and Associates, which meant he spent most of his days managing timelines, fielding phone calls from people who were upset about timelines, and building spreadsheets that other people ignored. He was good at his job in the way that quiet, reliable people are good at things, consistently, without much fanfare, and without anyone stopping to say so. His house was a 3-bedroom rental on Caldwell Street in Millbrook, Ohio, a neighborhood that wasn't quite suburban and wasn't quite anything else. The houses were close together, the yards were modest, and most people had been there long enough to wave at each other across driveways without ever having a full conversation. He'd moved in 2 years ago after the divorce, when the priority had been finding something with a second bedroom, a decent school district, and a monthly payment he could survive on one income. He had not looked for anything beautiful. He just needed something that worked. Most days, it did. None. Lily's name was officially Lily Ann Cross, but she had been introducing herself to strangers as Lily, like the flower, since she was 5, delivered with the kind of confidence that made adults smile and wonder where she got it. She was small for her age, with her mother's brown eyes and Ethan's tendency to go quiet when she was thinking hard about something. She liked dinosaurs, disliked most breakfast foods, and had recently decided that her favorite color was the kind of orange the sky turns when it's not quite sunset yet. Ethan had written that down in his phone in a note he kept labeled Things Lily Says, which had 47 entries in which he never showed anyone. She was the reason he woke up. That wasn't a metaphor. It was just the truth. On the worst days, and there were bad days, though he was careful not to let her see them, he would stand in the doorway of her room after she fell asleep and just look at her for a minute, not thinking anything in particular, just looking. And something about that would settle whatever had been unsettled in him, at least enough to make it through to morning. He'd never said that out loud. It seemed like the kind of thing you either understood without explanation or couldn't understand at all. The drive to school took 11 minutes. Lily spent 8 of them explaining a dream she'd had about a museum where all the paintings were made of food. The Mona Lisa was made of mashed potatoes, she said, but it still looked like her. How could you tell? The smile. You can do the smile in mashed potatoes. It's the eyes that are hard. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You think about this stuff a lot? Only when I'm asleep. She looked out the window. Dad, are we going to carve a pumpkin this year? Yeah, this weekend probably. Can I pick the face? That's your department. I want it to look surprised, not scary, surprised. Like it just got some news. Yeah. She thought about it. Like good news. Happy surprised. Not the bad kind. He pulled up to the school drop-off line. She unclicked her seatbelt before the car fully stopped, which she knew she wasn't supposed to do, and he gave her the look, and she clicked it back until the car stopped completely, and then she unclicked it again with dignity. Have a good day, he said. You too, Dad. She grabbed her backpack, pushed the door open. Then she stopped, leaned back in, and said, Don't forget we're out of orange juice. I know. You said that last time, and then we didn't have any for 3 days. I'll get it today. Promise? Lily, go to school. She went to school. He got the orange juice. He remembered because he stopped at the gas station mini-mart on his lunch break and paid $4.79 for a bottle that would have been $2.49 at the grocery store, which he didn't have time to go to on weekdays, which was a thing he'd stopped being irritated about somewhere around month 4 of doing it alone. Parenting logistics had a way of grinding down the parts of you that wasted energy on small irritations. You adapted or you didn't. Ethan had adapted. He ate lunch at his desk, a turkey sandwich on wheat, an apple, a bag of pretzels. The same thing he'd been bringing on Thursdays for about a year, not because he particularly loved it, but because removing that decision from his morning routine had freed up some cognitive space he could use somewhere more important. His coworker Marcus had once pointed at the sandwich and asked if Ethan was eating the same sadness sandwich from last week, and Ethan had said yes, and Marcus had shaken his head in sympathy, and Ethan had gone back to his spreadsheet. Marcus wasn't wrong, but sadness wasn't the right word for it. Sadness implied something was missing that you once had. What Ethan had built in the past 2 years wasn't sad. It was just small, contained, built for function, not for anything extra. He had a life, he just didn't have much room in it for surprises. The woman who moved into 114 Caldwell Street in late September did not look like someone who moved into houses on Caldwell Street. Ethan noticed this the way you notice anything that doesn't quite fit. Slowly at first, then all at once. He'd seen the moving truck from his kitchen window on a Saturday morning. Standard issue white truck, nothing unusual, a couple of guys carrying boxes in. He'd noted it the way he noted most things in the neighborhood. Filed it, moved on. A new neighbor. Probably a young couple, maybe a family. The Hendersons had moved out in August and the place had sat empty since. He didn't see her until the following Wednesday evening. He'd been coming home from picking up Lily, arms full of her backpack and a bag of groceries, trying to unlock the front door without putting anything down, which was a thing he was convinced he could do every single time and failed at every single time. He was on his third attempt at the key when he heard a voice. You want help with that? He turned. She was standing on the front walk of the house next door, tall, dark-haired, in a light gray coat that looked like it cost more than his truck payment. She had a coffee cup in one hand, the kind from an actual coffee shop, not a chain, and she was watching him with the mild, unhurried attention of someone who has nowhere pressing to be. I'm fine, Ethan said on instinct. You've tried that key 3 times. I know how many times I've tried it. A pause. She tilted her head slightly. Sometimes it helps if you lift the handle a little while you turn. He tried it. The door opened. He stood there for a second, feeling vaguely embarrassed about something he couldn't name. Thank you, he said. Victoria. She held out her hand. Not the coffee hand, the other one. He shifted the bag to his wrist, shook it. Ethan. You're the neighbor. Last time I checked. Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but close. I just moved in, number 114. I know, I saw the truck. Right, she nodded. Well, nice to meet you, Ethan. You too. He went inside. Lily asked who that was. He said the new neighbor. Lily said she had a nice coat. Ethan said, yeah, he'd noticed. He didn't think about it again until the following weekend. That was the thing about Victoria Sterling in those early weeks. She didn't announce herself. She didn't try to make an impression. She just kept appearing, calmly, at the edges of Ethan's life, and each time it happened, he registered it and filed it away and told himself it didn't mean anything in particular. He found out who she was not from her, but from Marcus. It was a Monday morning, about 2.5 weeks after she'd moved in. Marcus came in with his phone out, which he often did, and dropped into the chair across from Ethan's desk. "Hey, random question," Marcus said. "You know a woman named Victoria Sterling?" Ethan looked up. "Why?" "Because she's like a pretty significant person." "How significant?" Marcus turned his phone around. On the screen was a Forbes article, and at the top of it was a photograph of a woman in a sharp navy blazer standing in front of what looked like a glass and steel office building. The caption read, "Victoria Sterling, 30, founder and CEO of Sterling Capital Group." Ethan looked at the photo for a moment. "She moved in next door," he said. Marcus stared at him. "To you?" "To me." "Victoria Sterling moved next door to you." "That's what I said." "Ethan." Marcus put both hands flat on the desk. "She started her company at 24. She's on the board of 3 separate financial institutions. She was named one of the 30 most influential people in American business last year. She's worth—" He checked something on his phone. "Somewhere north of $2 billion. Ethan looked back at his spreadsheet. "That explains the coat." "The coat." "She has a very expensive coat." Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment, the way a man does when he is trying to find words for something that has defied reasonable expectation. "And you didn't know who she was." "I knew her name." "Ethan." "Marcus." "She's a billionaire." "Yeah, you mentioned." "Living next door to you." "I live there too, Marcus. In that little—" Marcus stopped himself. "In that house on Caldwell. It's a good house." "I'm not saying it's not a good house." "Then what are you saying?" Marcus shook his head. "I don't know what I'm saying. I think I'm just processing." He picked up his phone again. "Does she, talk to you?" Ethan thought about the door trick, the handle trick. Her hand extended, calm and direct. "A little," he said. "She's quiet, keeps to herself mostly." This was mostly true. Mom. The grocery incident happened on a Thursday. Ethan had parked in front of his house and was pulling bags out of the trunk. 4 of them, which was always too many to carry in one trip, but which he always attempted anyway because 2 trips felt like admitting something. When the seam on the oldest bag finally gave out, it split clean across the bottom. Pasta boxes, a can of tomatoes, a container of peanut butter, 2 apples, and a brick of cheddar cheese scattered across the driveway in a small grocery disaster. Ethan stood and looked at it for a second. "Perfect," he said to no one. "I'll get that." He turned. Victoria was on the sidewalk, already crouching down, picking up the pasta boxes. She was in running clothes today. Dark leggings, a light jacket, hair pulled back, no expensive coat. She looked younger this way, less like a magazine cover, more like a person. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I was walking by." She picked up both apples and the peanut butter without any visible awkwardness about it. Just efficient, like it was obvious. Ethan picked up the cheddar and the tomatoes and stood there for a moment holding them, watching her gather the rest of his groceries from his driveway with the calm competence of someone who was good at tasks in general. "Thank you," he said. Again. She stood, held out the gathered items. "Again?" "The door, last week." "Right." She handed them over. "Your bags are bad. That one especially. You should get the ones with the thick handles, the red ones. They're at Meijer." "I'll keep that in mind." She nodded. A beat passed. "You always do all the errands yourself?" she asked. It wasn't intrusive. It was just a question. But something about it landed differently than it might have from someone else. "It's just me and my daughter," he said. "So yeah." Victoria nodded again. No follow-up, no look of surprise or sympathy that he would have had to do something with. Just, "Okay, that's how it is." He appreciated that more than he could have explained. "Well," she said, "good luck with the door." "I've got the handle trick now." "Lift and turn," she said. Works every time. She kept walking. Lily was the one who named it. About 3 weeks after the grocery incident, after Victoria had appeared twice more, once to return a hammer she'd borrowed from the small toolbox he kept on his porch, once to mention that the elementary school 2 blocks away was apparently very good based on what she'd read, Lily asked at dinner, "Is the neighbor lady your friend?" Ethan was serving spaghetti. "What?" "The tall one with the coat. I see her talking to you sometimes." "She's just the neighbor." "But she talks to you." "People talk to their neighbors, Lil." Lily considered this. She twirled some spaghetti onto her fork, which she was still working on the technique for. "She seems nice." "She is nice." "Is she nice to you or just regular nice?" He looked at his daughter, 7 years old. "What's the difference?" "Regular nice is like polite. Nice to you is like she actually means it." Ethan set down his fork. "Where did you hear that?" "I made it up just now." He picked his fork back up. "She's probably just regular nice, Lily. She's being neighborly." "Okay," Lily returned to her spaghetti, "but she looks at you like she means it." Ethan didn't answer that. He told her to eat her dinner, and she ate her dinner, and later, when she was in bed, he stood in the kitchen a few minutes longer than he needed to and thought about nothing in particular, or pretended to. He was not a man who spent much time thinking about himself. That wasn't modesty. It was more like a system he'd developed without meaning to. After the marriage ended, after Claire had sat across from him at the kitchen table of a different house in a different city and said the things she'd been working up to for longer than he'd known, he had done what he did with most painful things, absorbed it, packed it somewhere internal, and kept moving. Claire had not been cruel about it. That almost made it worse. She'd been careful, measured, choosing each word like she'd rehearsed it. She'd said he was a good man. She'd meant it. But there was a shape of life she'd wanted, sharper edges, bigger rooms, more ambition aimed at something visible, and Ethan didn't fit that shape and probably never would. "You're not someone who reaches," she'd said, and he had sat with that for a very long time. He'd heard it differently over the years. On good days it sounded like she was talking about herself, about what she needed that he couldn't give. On bad days it sounded like a diagnosis, like something confirmed. He'd had more bad days than he'd admitted to anyone. What he had built since then was a life that required nothing extraordinary of him. He went to work. He brought Lily to school. He made the sad Thursday sandwich. He carried too many grocery bags. He was reliable and quiet and present, and that was enough. Because enough was something he could control. And enough was better than reaching for something and confirming once and for all that you couldn't quite get there. He was not unhappy. He wanted to make that clear, at least to himself. He was not standing in his kitchen sinking. He was maintaining, functioning, doing the actual job of a life. He had just stopped expecting it to surprise him. The book conversation was when something shifted, even if he wouldn't admit that for weeks. It was a Sunday afternoon, early November. Ethan was sitting on the front steps while Lily played in the yard with a set of plastic dinosaurs she'd arranged in what she called a crisis. He had a cup of coffee and had been attempting to read the same 3 pages of a novel for 20 minutes. Victoria came out of her front door with a book under her arm. She walked to her porch, saw him, and stopped at the edge of the yard between their 2 houses. "Any good?" she asked, nodding at his book. He looked at it. A Long Way Down by Nick Hornby. "I've been reading the same 3 pages. Distracted or just not into it?" "Jury's still out." She held up her own. "I just finished this one. It's not what the cover suggests." He squinted across the yard. "Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow," by Gabrielle Zevin. He'd seen it on lists. "What does the cover suggest?" "Something lighter." She paused. "It's not light, but it's good." "What's it actually about?" She thought for a second. "It's about people who make things together, and how doing that can be the most important relationship in your life without either of you knowing exactly what to call it." She paused again. "And about how badly we can hurt the people we're closest to by accident." Ethan looked at her. She was standing at the edge of the yard in jeans and a dark green sweater, holding the book loosely at her side. She wasn't performing the description. She was just saying what she thought. Sounds heavy, he said. It earned it, she said. The heavy part. A pause. In the yard, Lily announced that the Brachiosaurus had made a decision. You can borrow it, Victoria said, when you're done with yours. I might never finish mine. Then start with mine. He looked at her for a second. Okay, he said. She brought it over that evening. He started it that night. At 11:30, he was still reading. There was an afternoon in mid-November that Ethan would later think of as the first time he noticed what was actually happening, not in the way you notice a thing as it forms, but in the way you notice what's already been forming when you finally hold still long enough. It was a Sunday. He'd made chili, an actual attempt, not a can, because Lily had asked for it, and also because it was the kind of day that called for something warm, with rain tracking sideways against the windows, and the heat kicking on every 30 minutes in that house-settling way it had. He'd made too much, the way he always made too much, because having recipes was something he was theoretically capable of and practically terrible at. He stood looking at the pot for a moment. He walked next door. He knocked. He was holding a container of chili, and he was very aware that this was a thing he was choosing to do, and that it was a small thing, and that he was somehow making it complicated in his head. Victoria opened the door. She was in socks. The expensive coat was nowhere. She had a laptop under one arm, and her hair wasn't fully settled, like she'd pushed her hands through it while thinking. Hi, she said. I made too much chili, he said. You don't have to take it. She looked at the container. Is it good chili? I think so. Lily hasn't complained. Lily's 7. She complains about everything else. Victoria took the container. Thank you. It's not a big deal. I know. She smiled then, briefly, and it wasn't the professional version of a smile, not the one he imagined she used in conference rooms and on magazine covers. It was smaller than that, more real. Thank you, Ethan. He nodded, walked back across the wet grass. He stood at his own kitchen counter for a minute after that, feeling something he couldn't quite name. Not quite pleasure, not quite discomfort. Something in between that he hadn't felt in a long time and wasn't sure what to do with. He put the leftover chili in the fridge, helped Lily set up a movie, and told himself it was just soup, except it wasn't soup. He knew it wasn't soup. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was what Victoria carried with her into that house on Caldwell Street. Victoria Sterling had been working since she was 20 years old. Not working the way most 20-year-olds work, picking up shifts, figuring it out, but working with the specific, pressurized focus of someone who understood from a very young age that she was building something and that no one else was going to do it for her. She had launched Sterling Capital Group at 24 with a seed round she'd half-negotiated, half-willed into existence. By 27, she'd turned it into something real. By 30, it was something significant. The magazine profiles called her visionary. She didn't think of herself that way. She thought of herself as someone who worked very hard and was very careful and paid close attention. Paying close attention was a skill that served her well in business. It had not historically served her well in her personal life. She had dated men who were impressive in the same way she was impressive, which turned out to mean they were in competition with her even when they said they weren't. She had dated men who were drawn to her success first and her as a person second, which she could always feel eventually like pressure behind a wall. She had dated one man seriously, James, for 14 months, who had told her, with genuine kindness, that being with her felt like standing next to a fire. Warm when you were at the right distance, overwhelming up close. She had moved to Millbrook, Ohio to run a subsidiary acquisition that needed 6 months of on-site oversight. She had rented the house on Caldwell Street because her assistant had found it. It was within a reasonable commute, and it was quiet. She had not planned to notice anything about her neighborhood. She had planned to work. She noticed Ethan Cross on day 3. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing like that. She'd been standing at her front window with her coffee, going through emails, when she'd looked up and watched him load Lily into the car for school. Watched him buckle her seatbelt and check it twice. Watched him notice that something was wrong with Lily's jacket zipper, crouch down in the cold, and fix it patiently while Lily talked to him about something that made him laugh. A real laugh, not a performed one. Victoria had stood at the window for an extra minute and watched a man be patient and present with his child, and thought, that's what it looks like when someone just actually loves somebody. She went back to her emails, but she kept the window in her mind. She didn't tell herself she was pursuing anything. She would have found that description inaccurate and slightly embarrassing. She was just paying attention. The way she paid attention to things. She noticed that he carried too many bags. She noticed that the key trick with his door required the handle lift, which she'd figured out the first time she tried the same door during a lockout situation with the property manager. She noticed that he worked steadily and came home consistently, and that there was nothing flashy or performed about his life. No part of it seemed designed to be observed. She found this interesting in a way she couldn't quite account for with her usual frameworks. The borrowed hammer was real. She had found a small nail coming loose from her door frame and had no tools, and had knocked on his door genuinely. But she had also kept the hammer for 4 days longer than necessary. The book recommendation was real. She had genuinely finished it that week and genuinely thought he might like it. The chili. She ate the entire container for dinner that Sunday and thought, this man actually knows how to cook, which surprised her for no defensible reason, and which she thought about more than once during the following week. She was not, she told herself, doing anything about it. She was observing, paying attention. She was very aware that this was a thin distinction. The evening she went to return the book, the Gabrielle Zevin novel she'd lent him, Lily opened the door. It was a Tuesday. Lily was in dinosaur print pajamas and holding a juice box with the focused grip of someone who did not intend to let go of it. "Hi," she said. "Hi." Victoria looked down at her. "Is your dad home?" "He's doing dishes." Lily tilted her head. "You're the coat lady." "I am. Is that my name now?" Lily considered it. "It could be your nickname." "I'll take it." Victoria crouched down a little. "I'm Victoria." "I'm Lily, like the flower." "I know. Your dad mentioned you." Lily's face shifted, not quite surprised, but close to pleased. "What did he say?" "He said you have strong opinions about pumpkins." Lily smiled immediately, the particular smile of a child who has been accurately seen. We made a surprised face one. "Not scary. Dad wanted scary, but I said no." "You were right." "I know." Lily stepped back from the door, opening it wider. "You can come in. He won't mind." "I'll just wait." "He won't mind," Lily repeated, with the absolute confidence of someone for whom this was not a question. Victoria came inside. Ethan heard voices and turned off the sink. He walked into the front hallway drying his hands on a dish towel and found Victoria standing just inside his door and Lily explaining the entire history of the surprised pumpkin, which was now sitting on the counter and would apparently be staying there until Thanksgiving, as a guest. He stopped in the doorway. There was a moment, brief, small, where Victoria looked up and saw him, and something in her expression shifted in a way he couldn't quite read. A softening, something quiet. Then it was gone, replaced by normal, and she held out the book. "Finished it," she said. "What did you think?" "It stayed with me more than I expected." "The end or the whole thing?" She considered it seriously. "The whole thing, but the end differently." A pause. "It made me think about how much of the damage we do to people is because we can't say the actual thing." Ethan looked at her. Lily had wandered away, satisfied with her pumpkin testimony. The kitchen light was on, throwing warm yellow into the hallway, and outside it was full dark and cold. "Yeah," he said. "I thought about that too." Neither of them said anything for a second. "I should let you finish up," Victoria said. "You don't have to—" He stopped, restarted. "You want some coffee?" She looked at him for a moment. That quality of attention she had, steady and direct, landing on him like it had somewhere to be. "Sure," she said. They sat at his kitchen table for an hour and talked about the book, and then, without noticing the exact moment it happened, stopped talking about the book. Lily came in twice, once for water, once to show Victoria a drawing of a triceratops she'd made at school. And Victoria looked at both things with the same seriousness she gave everything, and Lily accepted this as her due. After Victoria left, Ethan washed the coffee cups. He moved slowly, not thinking about anything specifically, letting the evening settle around him. When he turned off the kitchen light, he stood in the dark for a second. He was not reaching for anything, he told himself. He was just paying attention. In this, it turned out, he and Victoria Sterling were more alike than either of them knew. The weeks that followed were ordinary in the way that certain kinds of extraordinary things are ordinary, unremarkable in each specific piece, but adding up to something you can feel accumulating without being able to point to any single moment as the cause. She came by on a Saturday when the gutter on his porch pulled loose, and he was on a ladder that was slightly too short because she was walking back from a run and looked at the situation and said, "That ladder is not tall enough for that." "I'm managing." "You're stretching." "I've got it." "Ethan, The gutter bracket shifted in his hand. "Okay, maybe hold the ladder." She held the ladder. He fixed the gutter. Then she held the ladder while he climbed down, and she said, "You need a taller ladder." And he said, "I know." And she said nothing further about it, and somehow that was the right thing. She texted him a week later. He hadn't given her his number. He looked at the message and then at the contact name, Victoria 114, and realized Lily must have done it during one of her kitchen visits using his phone. The text was a link to a review of a restaurant that had opened in Millbrook with just the message, apparently good soup. He responded, "Noted." She sent back, "You'd have to do research. I know you're very serious about chili standards." He stared at his phone for longer than was probably warranted. "The chili was an experiment," he wrote. "Results were acceptable. Lily said it was the best she'd ever had. Lily says that about everything I make. That might mean something anyway." He put the phone down. He picked it up again. "Maybe," he wrote, and hit send before he could second-guess it. November turned into December. The morning drives to school got colder. Lily discovered that the neighbor lady, Victoria, Ethan corrected, every time. Victoria lady, Lily compromised, had once been to Japan and began a dedicated campaign to learn Japanese phrases to share with her. Victoria received each phrase solemnly. Konnichiwa, arigato, kawaii desu, which Lily pronounced ku-y-e. She corrected the pronunciation gently without making it a correction, and Lily practiced the right version with the seriousness of a linguist. Ethan watched this happen from across his kitchen and felt something he couldn't name press against the inside of his chest. Not hope, exactly. He was careful around hope. It was the kind of thing that required a certain confidence in yourself, a belief that the outcome might actually go the way you wanted. Ethan didn't quite have that belief. He'd been comfortable not having it, but it was something adjacent to hope, something warm and slightly terrifying that he kept trying to put in the box he used for things that weren't relevant to his daily operations. The box wasn't quite closing. He was not, he told himself, someone who fell for people. That was the past. That was a younger version of him who hadn't learned yet what falling for someone could cost. He had paid the tuition on that lesson. He knew the curriculum. What he told himself, when he was being careful, was that Victoria was a neighbor, a kind one, an interesting one, a temporarily interesting distraction from a life that was good and small and his. He told himself this while texting her about soup, while saving the contact name she'd been saved under because Lily had typed it and he didn't want to change Lily's work, while staying up past 11 reading books she'd recommended, feeling them the way she'd said to feel them, and wanting to talk to her about what he'd found. He told himself it was nothing while knowing, on some level, that his self-protection infrastructure was not quite reaching, that it was building into something. He just didn't know what to do with that. So he did what he'd always done with the things he didn't know what to do with. He kept going. He made the sandwiches and drove the routes and carried the bags and held his life together with both hands. And once in a while, Victoria Sterling appeared at the edges of it, calm and steady and specific, looking at him like she meant it. And every time he filed it away and told himself it was nothing, and every time the filing felt a little less convincing. December arrived with the first real cold, the kind that meant winter was done suggesting itself and had moved in for real. Ethan hung Lily's drawings in the front window so the neighbors could see them, a tradition he'd started in their first winter in the house, mostly to make Lily feel like her art had a public. And Lily immediately asked if the Japanese lady could see them. "Victoria," Ethan said. "I know her name, Dad." "Then use it." Lily considered this. "Victoria Lady," she said. "Like a title." Ethan couldn't argue with the logic. He stood at the window that evening after Lily was in bed. The street was quiet. The house at 114 had lights on, warm, yellow, visible from where he stood. He didn't know what she was doing over there. Working, probably. She was always working, in the way that serious people are always working, not miserably, but because it was part of how she moved through the world. He thought about what she'd said about the book, how much of the damage we do is because we can't say the actual thing. He thought about that for a long time. Then he went to bed. He didn't reach for anything. He just lay in the dark and listened to his house make its sounds, and thought about the ways a life can quietly change while you're standing still inside it, too careful to notice until it's already different. Outside on Caldwell Street, the first snow of December started to fall. Small flakes. Almost nothing. But accumulating. The snow that started in December didn't let up for 3 days. By Saturday morning, Caldwell Street was buried under 8 inches, which in Ohio meant 2 things. Schools would be closed Monday, and every person who owned a shovel was going to spend some portion of the weekend being quietly resentful about it. Ethan was no exception. He stood on his front porch at 7:15 in the morning with his coffee, looking at the driveway, making the internal calculation that all single homeowners make when faced with manual labor they didn't ask for. He went back inside, put on an extra layer, and started shoveling. He was about halfway through when Victoria's front door opened. She came out in a heavy parka, a wool hat pulled down to her eyebrows, and boots that looked like they might have been purchased specifically for this situation, which he suspected was accurate because they still had the faint look of something unworn. She was carrying a shovel, a new one, still bright red, and she walked to the end of her driveway and started working without saying anything. Ethan watched her for a moment. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I live here," she said, not looking up. "My driveway." "I meant the technique. You're going to hurt your back." She stopped. "What's wrong with my technique?" "You're lifting instead of pushing. In snow like this, you push to the edge first, then lift what you have to." She looked at the shovel, then at the snow. Then she adjusted her grip and tried it. It was immediately more efficient, and she knew it, but she didn't make a face about it. She just nodded once and kept going. They worked in parallel for a while. The street was quiet. The neighborhood sounds were muffled the way they get under heavy snow, the whole world a little further away than usual. Ethan finished his driveway and, without making a decision about it exactly, moved to help finish hers. Victoria didn't comment. She moved to the other side and they cleared it together in maybe 10 minutes. When they were done, they stood at the end of her driveway, both of them breathing a little harder than was ideal. She pulled off her wool hat, and a significant portion of her hair came with it, staticky and sideways. She pressed it down with one hand, looking at the cleared driveway with mild satisfaction. "Good system," she said. "Push, then lift." "I'll remember that." He picked up both shovels, his and hers, and leaned them against the side of her porch, without thinking about whether it was strange to do that. "You have plans today?" She looked at him briefly. "Working. Conference call at 2. On a Saturday." "The other side of the call is in London. It's their Monday." "Right," he nodded. "That sounds exhausting." She laughed. It was quiet and short, and he could tell it surprised her a little, the way certain laughs do when they come out before you've decided to let them. "It's usually fine," she said. "I like working." "Do you actually like it, or is it just what you do?" The question came out before he'd evaluated it, and for a second he thought it might land wrong. But she looked at it directly, the way she looked at most things, and thought about it honestly. "Both," she said, "which makes it complicated sometimes." He nodded. He understood that, actually. The way something can be genuinely yours, and also the thing that costs you the most. "Lily's got a snow day Monday," he said, moving back toward his side. "She'll lose her mind." "In a good way?" "In a chaotic way. She'll want to build something enormous." Victoria smiled, and this time it stayed a little longer. "Tell her I have food coloring. You can make colored snow." Ethan looked at her. You have food coloring. I cook sometimes. You cook? Is that surprising? He thought about how to answer that without saying yes, which was the accurate answer. I guess I assumed you had, I don't know, a person who does that. She gave him a look that was not quite amused and not quite offended, but lived in the neighborhood of both. A person who does that. I didn't mean it badly. I know. She picked up her new shovel. I had that once. An assistant who handled food and logistics. I stopped it a couple years ago. Why? She considered it for a second. Because I realized I'd gotten to a point where I didn't know how to feed myself without someone arranging it. And that seemed like a problem worth fixing. She said it plainly, without drama, the way she said most things. Like it was just information. But he heard something underneath it. The particular discomfort of a person who'd recognized something uncomfortable about themselves and done something about it, which was harder than most people admitted. The food coloring offer stands it, she said. I'll tell Lily. He was already on his side of the invisible property line. She'll probably show up at your door. That's fine. You say that now. I mean it. He looked at her for a second. In her unworn boots and her flattened by static hair, holding a bright red shovel she'd probably bought in the last 2 weeks, and thought, not for the first time, that she was nothing like what you'd expect. He went inside. He made Lily's breakfast. He didn't think about Victoria Sterling for the rest of the morning. This was not true, but it's what he told himself. Lily found out about the food coloring within the hour. Ethan had made the mistake of mentioning it while pouring her cereal, the acceptable kind, which was the kind with exactly enough sugar to be interesting without crossing into the territory where she bounced off walls. And Lily set down her spoon and looked at him with the focused energy of someone who has just received a mission. She has all the colors? Lily asked. She said food coloring. I don't know how many. Can I go ask? Eat breakfast first. I'm eating. You put the spoon down. She picked the spoon back up and ate, with the rapid, barely chewing efficiency of a child with somewhere to be. She was out the front door 20 minutes later, in her puffy coat and boots, marching next door with the confidence of someone who had been invited. Ethan watched from the window. Victoria opened the door. Lily said something. Victoria said something back. Victoria disappeared for a moment and returned with a small collection of bottles, and Lily examined them one by one with the seriousness of a pharmacist. Then she said something that made Victoria look briefly uncertain, and then Victoria pulled her coat off the hook inside the door. Ethan was outside in 2 minutes. What's happening? He said, walking up to them. Lily held up a bottle of blue food coloring. She's going to help me make a map. A map. A snow map. Of the whole front yard. Different colors for different countries. She turned to Victoria. We need green for the grass parts. I have green, Victoria said. She was in the parka again, already zipping it. She glanced at Ethan. I got recruited. I noticed. She's very persuasive. She comes by it naturally. Ethan said it before he could weigh it, and Victoria looked at him briefly with something like warmth that made him look away. They spent 40 minutes in the front yard while Lily dictated the geographic layout of her snow map, and Victoria crouched in the snow mixing colors in a small bowl she'd brought from her kitchen. Ethan's job was logistics, carrying the bowl, holding the bottles, confirming that yes, Brazil was bigger than France because Lily was particular about accuracy. At one point, Victoria's knee went down into the snow, and she made a sharp, involuntary sound of cold surprise that she immediately tried to recover from, and Lily said, You have to kneel on your other knee. And Victoria said, Thank you, I've learned that now. And Ethan did not laugh out loud, but it was a near thing. When Lily finally declared the map complete, she stood back and surveyed her work with her hands on her hips, the way she always did when she was satisfied with something. The snow map of the world stretched across the front yard in small, slightly blurry patches of color that bore approximately no geographic accuracy whatsoever, but were enthusiastically labeled with small sticks. It's perfect, Lily announced. It really is, Victoria said. She meant it. Lily looked at her sideways. You should come for hot chocolate. Ethan said, Lily, we have the good kind, the kind with the little marshmallows. You can say no, Ethan said to Victoria. Victoria looked from Lily to Ethan and back. "I'll come for hot chocolate," she said. The hot chocolate was the good kind. That part was accurate. They sat at his kitchen table, all three of them, while Lily narrated the international crisis currently being resolved in the snow map, which apparently involved a territorial dispute between the blue section and the yellow section over the green strip Lily had designated as the jungle part. Victoria listened with complete attention and asked clarifying questions. Which countries exactly? What were the terms of the disagreement? Was there a treaty in place? And Lily answered them with the authority of someone who had clearly thought this through more than seemed possible for a 7-year-old. Ethan watched Victoria do this and felt something settle in him. She wasn't performing interest. She was actually listening, not in the way adults sometimes performed listening to children with a patient smile that was really just waiting, but actually, specifically, interested in what Lily was building in her head. There was no condescension in it. She just treated the snow map geopolitics like they were worth engaging with, which to Lily, of course, they were. He got up to refill the mugs. He stood at the counter with his back to them for a moment, listening to Lily explain the jungle's neutral status, and thought about how this kitchen had sounded for the past 2 years. Mostly just the two of them. Lily's voice and his. The TV sometimes. The house sounds. The quiet that sat in the spaces between. It didn't feel like that right now. He turned around and brought the mugs back and sat down, and Victoria wrapped both hands around hers the way people do when they're actually cold, and not just holding something out of politeness. And Lily said, "Dad, tell her about the pumpkin face philosophy." And Ethan said, "I don't have a pumpkin face philosophy." And Lily said, "Yes, you do. You just don't call it that." And Victoria looked at him with this open, slightly amused expression and said, "I want to hear the philosophy." So he explained it. The surprised face versus the scary face. Happy surprised, not bad surprised. The idea that a thing could be startled by good news, and that was worth carving into something. Victoria listened to this with the same seriousness she gave everything, and when he finished, she said, "That's a better philosophy than most people have about bigger things." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and Lily said, "See?" in the tone of someone whose point had just been proven. December moved the way December does, too fast at the end, slow in the middle, full of small obligations. Ethan's company had a holiday gathering at a rented event space downtown that he went to briefly, drank 1 beer, talked to Marcus for 40 minutes, and left before the dancing started. Marcus said he looked distracted. Ethan said he was fine. Marcus said, "You keep looking at your phone," and Ethan said he was expecting a text about Lily's pickup, which was partially true in the sense that he was watching his phone, but not about Lily's pickup. Victoria had texted him a question about a book, a different one this time, one he'd mentioned in passing that he'd read years ago and still thought about. She wanted to know if he remembered a specific scene, a conversation between two characters near the end. He'd spent 20 minutes trying to remember it accurately enough to be useful. I think he says something about how the worst kind of loneliness is the kind where you're surrounded by people, he'd written finally. But I might be misremembering. A pause, and then, "No, that's it. That's exactly it." And then, "How do you remember things like that?" He'd stared at that for a while. Then, "I think some things just stay because they were already true when you read them." He'd sent it before evaluating it, which was becoming a habit with her. She'd written back, "Yeah, just that." But it sat with him the rest of the evening in the way that single words can sometimes carry more than sentences. Marcus caught him looking at his phone and said something about the distracted thing again, and Ethan pocketed the phone and asked about Marcus's kids, which reliably occupied Marcus for the rest of any conversation. On the drive home, he thought about the year that was ending. 2 years since the divorce was finalized. 2 years on Caldwell Street. 2 years of building a life that fit the actual shape of his life, without extra rooms for things he'd stopped allowing himself to want. He pulled into the driveway. His house was dark except for the porch light and Lily's nightlight visible through her curtain. He sat in the car for a minute. Next door, the lights were on. He went inside. Christmas was Lily's territory. This was a rule Ethan had established in their first year alone together when he'd realized that the holiday either became about her enthusiasm or it became about the absence of what it used to be, and one of those outcomes was survivable, and the other wasn't. So Lily controlled the tree, its size, its lights, its ornament selection, and Ethan's job was execution and funding. She had strong opinions about tinsel, specifically that it was non-negotiable. Mom doesn't do tinsel, Lily mentioned while they were decorating with the factual neutrality she used for Claire-related observations. Not sad, not pointed, just reporting. Your mom thinks it's messy, Ethan said. It is messy. Lily draped another fistful over a branch. But it's pretty. Both can be true. Dad, she turned to him. Can Victoria come see the tree when we're done? He was untangling a string of lights. He kept his eyes on the task. We can ask her. Can I ask her? Sure. Lily nodded with satisfaction and returned to the tinsel. She had already mentally resolved this. Victoria came over that evening and stood in the living room doorway and looked at the tree, which was, objectively, over-decorated to the point of structural concern, and said, without any irony at all, "That's a serious tree." I know, Lily said proudly. The tinsel is a bold choice. It was necessary. I agree. Victoria looked at it a moment longer. It looks like it's trying. Lily considered this. That's the right way to describe it, she said. Ethan, standing in the kitchen doorway, thought, yeah, that's the right way to describe a lot of things. He made tea. Nobody had asked for it, but it seemed like the right thing to do, and he needed a moment in the kitchen to settle whatever was happening in his chest, which had been doing an irregular thing lately whenever Victoria was in the room, and he stood still enough to notice it. He brought the tea out. Lily was showing Victoria an ornament, a small ceramic dinosaur with a Santa hat, purchased from the school's holiday craft fair, which Lily considered her finest acquisition of the year. Victoria examined it with the appropriate gravity. It's a festive ankylosaur, Lily explained. I can see that. The hat is a little too big. That makes it better. I know, Dad helped me pick it. Victoria looked up at Ethan as he set the mugs down. There was something in that look, brief, warm, and direct, that he absorbed without knowing quite how to process, like she was noting something specific about him, something she'd been accumulating. He looked back. He held it for a second longer than was casual, and then Lily asked a question about something, and the moment passed, and they drank their tea and talked about the tree and the ankylosaur and nothing important, and all of it felt to Ethan like the most substantial thing that had happened in his house in a long time. He didn't let himself think about why. January came in cold and direct. The holidays folded back into ordinary time, and ordinary time meant Ethan's alarm at 6:15 and Lily's debate over breakfast foods and the commute and the spreadsheets and the consistent low-grade management of a life being held together by its own internal logic. Victoria's schedule picked up. She mentioned a deal closing, a board meeting in New York, a flight she was taking on a Wednesday and returning from on Friday. He knew this in the natural way that neighbors know things, from brief exchanges, from a rented car appearing in the driveway when she got back, from the single text she sent on the Thursday evening that said simply, "Still here?" He'd stared at that for a second, unsure if it was meant philosophically or just as a check-in. He'd gone with the practical interpretation. Here. Cold. Lily has decided January is the month of soup. She'd written back, vegetable or chicken? Both. She has a system. I want to understand the system. He'd smiled at his phone in his car in the parking lot of Lily's school, waiting in the pickup line, and then the car in front of him moved, and he put the phone away and picked up his daughter and drove home, and that was that. Except it wasn't quite that. The texts had become a daily occurrence without either of them naming it as such. Not long ones. Not significant ones. Book recommendations, observations, a photo she'd sent once of a building she'd passed in New York that she thought he might find interesting, a narrow brick brownstone with an elaborate iron fire escape, with just the caption, "Over-engineered." He'd looked at the photo for longer than necessary and wrote back, "That's why it works." She'd sent a thumbs up. These were small things. He knew they were small things. He also knew that small things, accumulated, were not small. He knew what he was doing, or rather, He knew what he was almost doing. He was edging towards something, maintaining plausible deniability about the direction, the way you drive toward a destination while telling yourself you're just going for a drive. He was not an impulsive person. He was not someone who threw himself at things. He had been once, and the result was a kitchen table conversation about not reaching, and he had taken the lesson seriously. But something about Victoria had a way of making his usual caution feel less like wisdom and more like the thing you tell yourself to stay comfortable. He wasn't sure what to do with that. It was a Tuesday in late January when the pattern solidified into something unmistakable, at least from Ethan's side. He'd had a rough day, not dramatically rough, the kind of rough that doesn't announce itself, that just slowly drains the energy out of a normal day through small accumulations. A project deadline moved up without explanation. A contractor he'd been managing for weeks called to say he was pulling out. His lunch had been eaten by someone in the break room who had also taken the time to leave the empty container in the fridge, which wasn't catastrophic, but which, at 2 in the afternoon after the other two things, had felt personally targeted. He picked Lily up, got home, made dinner on autopilot, pasta, the reliable fallback, and was sitting on the couch after Lily went to bed, not watching the television he'd turned on, when his phone buzzed. Victoria. Long day. He looked at it. He didn't know how she knew. He hadn't said anything. He typed, "That obvious? Your light was off early. You're usually up later." He stared at that. She'd noticed his lights. She knew the pattern of his lights. "Rough day," he wrote. "Nothing serious. Just the accumulation kind. Those are sometimes worse," she wrote back. "The serious kind at least gets to be dramatic." He laughed. Quietly, alone on his couch in the dark, he laughed. "How was yours?" he wrote. "Productive and exhausting. I closed the thing I've been working on. The London call thing? That one. It's been 4 months. 4 months is a long time to be on a call. Multiple calls," she wrote, and he could hear the dry delivery. "I'm not that patient." "You seem patient." A pause. "I'm strategic," she wrote. "There's a difference." He thought about that. About the distinction between patience, which was passive, waiting, and strategic, which implied you knew where you were going and were willing to move at whatever pace was required to get there. He thought about the hammer she'd borrowed for 4 days, the food coloring she'd somehow had in a house where she barely cooked, the books that appeared with specific personal recommendations, the texts that started as practical and had somehow become something he looked for. He thought, oh, not as a revelation, more like recognizing something that had been visible for a while, once you removed the thing you'd been standing in front of it. He stared at the ceiling, then he wrote, "Congratulations on the deal." She wrote, "Thank you, get some sleep. You too." "I will." Eventually. He put the phone down. He sat in his dark living room with the television going at low volume, and he sat with the O for a while. Let it be a real thing. Let it exist in the room without immediately finding somewhere to put it. He was scared of it. He didn't pretend not to be. The fear had a familiar shape. It was the same shape as the last time he'd believed in something like this, and it carried the same potential for the specific kind of damage that came from being wrong about what you were to someone. But underneath the fear was something else, something quieter and more stubborn. The something that had started very quietly in December, when she'd stood in the cold and helped his daughter make a snow map of the world and treated the whole enterprise like it was worth doing properly. February brought the thing Ethan hadn't planned for, proximity at a new level. Lily's school had a winter showcase, a loose collection of drawings and small projects displayed in the gymnasium for families to walk through. It was a Friday evening event, fluorescent lit and crowded with parents who were trying to find their own kids' work among several hundred nearly identical pieces of construction paper art. Ethan went, of course. He always went. He stood in front of Lily's contribution, a collage described as "what home feels like," which included a drawing of a bowl of pasta, a dinosaur, a porch light, and in the corner, a small figure with dark hair that he recognized immediately, and felt something press behind his sternum. "Is that who I think it is?" said a voice to his left. He turned. Victoria was standing there in a gray sweater, no coat because it was indoors, looking at the collage. He hadn't known she was coming. He was fairly certain she hadn't known he'd be there either, because her expression had the slight quality of someone who was recalibrating. "Lily invited you," he said. Not a question. "She left a note on my door." Victoria looked at the collage again. "Is that me in the corner?" He looked at it. The small dark-haired figure, slightly taller than the porch light, holding what appeared to be a tiny red shovel. "With the shovel," he said. "I bought a new shovel in December." She notices things. Victoria was quiet for a second, looking at it, something in her face that he couldn't read or didn't let himself read. Then, "It's a good collage." "She worked on it for 2 weeks. I can tell." Lily herself materialized from the crowd at that point and grabbed Victoria's hand with the complete unself-consciousness of a child who had decided this was normal, which apparently she had. She pulled her toward a different display, her dinosaur section, which occupied a full half of one table and had a dedicated label reading Dinosaur Corner in Lily's handwriting. And Victoria went, and Ethan stood for a moment longer in front of the collage. The porch light, the bowl of pasta, the shovel. What home feels like. He pressed his tongue to the back of his teeth and looked at the ceiling and did the thing where he told himself to not make this into more than it was. The thing answered back this time. Maybe stop doing that. He went to find his daughter. They walked back to Caldwell Street together after the showcase, all three of them, because the school was 6 blocks away, and the night was cold but clear, and Lily had decided they were walking. She held both their hands at various points, one of theirs and then the other, alternating, and talked continuously about the political situation in her snow map, which had apparently escalated over the past few weeks, while Ethan had been unaware. "The jungle countries are forming an alliance," she reported. "Against who?" Victoria asked. "The blue part. They're doing a trade thing." "Smart move by the jungle," Victoria said. "Consolidate before they expand." Lily looked up at her with delight. "That's what I said. You have good instincts." "I know." Lily squeezed her hand and then dropped both hands to take a running leap over a crack in the sidewalk. "Dad said I should be a diplomat." "When did I say that?" Ethan said. "Last week, when I resolved the argument between you and the contractor guy on the phone." He had no memory of this. "What do you mean?" "You were on the phone being frustrated, and I drew him a picture of what I thought the problem was, and you showed him, and then it worked." She said this like it was obvious. That's what diplomats do." Victoria looked at Ethan sideways with an expression that was completely still except for the corners. He shook his head slightly, which made it worse. "I think your dad's right," Victoria said. "I'm right about most things," Lily said, and ran ahead to the next driveway. Ethan walked the remaining half block beside Victoria in the particular quiet that follows something funny, the kind where neither person wants to break it immediately. The streetlights were on. The cold had that dry, clean quality that meant the temperature would drop another 10 degrees by midnight. "She's something," Victoria said finally, quiet enough that it wasn't for Lily. "Yeah," Ethan said. "You've done a good job with her." He looked at the sidewalk. That was the kind of thing that hit differently from Victoria than it would have from someone else, and he wasn't sure why. Maybe because she said it like an observation rather than a compliment, like she'd assessed something and reached a conclusion and was just reporting it. "I'm figuring it out," he said. "You're past figuring it out." He glanced at her. "Some days. Most days. You don't see the bad ones. I've seen some of the hard ones," she said. "That's not the same as bad." He didn't answer that. He thought about the grocery bags and the ladder and the 3 attempts at the door key, and which of those she'd seen and what she'd noticed, and whether the distinction she was drawing between hard and bad was one he'd ever let himself make. They reached their houses. Lily was already at his door figuring out the handle trick, which she had now fully internalized. "Lift and turn," she told the door, executing it perfectly. "She's got it," Victoria said. "Took her one try," Ethan said. Lily pushed the door open and went inside without looking back, which was either confidence or she'd just assumed the adults would follow. Victoria stopped at the edge of the walk between their 2 houses. "Thanks for letting me tag along," she said. "Lily invited you." "You could have said it was a family thing." He looked at her. "It was fine. You didn't have to come if I wanted to come, she said. Direct, no cushion around it. I wanted to see her project. A pause. He stood in the cold and looked at her and felt again the thing he kept trying to file away. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. She went inside. He stood on his porch for a second, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the front of her house. A light came on in the upstairs window. He went inside. He helped Lily get ready for bed. He heard about the diplomatic implications of the Jungle Alliance one more time. He kissed her forehead and turned off the light and went to the kitchen and stood at the counter without doing anything in particular. He thought about what she'd said. I wanted to come, the way she'd said it, not apologetically, not trying to walk it back or soften it or make it sound casual, just the fact of it, offered plainly. He thought about being strategic. He thought about the difference between waiting and knowing where you're going. He thought about what his life sounded like when Victoria was in it and what it sounded like when she wasn't. He thought about the collage, the porch light, the small figure with the red shovel, what home feels like. He stood in his kitchen for a long time. He wasn't ready to call it what it was. Not yet. The fear was still real and the old voice was still there, the one that said not enough in Claire's careful, measured tone. He couldn't turn that off just by wanting to, but something had shifted. Quietly, without announcement, somewhere in the space between December and February, without his permission and without any grand gesture or moment of cinematic clarity, something had shifted. He wasn't standing perfectly still anymore. He didn't know yet what he was going to do about that. He was not a man who moved fast toward uncertain things. He had the scars from the last time he'd let himself believe easily. But the box he'd been keeping things in, the one labeled not relevant, not for you, don't reach, was not closing the way it used to. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure he wanted to fix that. The box stopped closing somewhere in the first week of March. Ethan didn't decide this. It wasn't a choice he made while standing at the counter or sitting in his car or doing any of the deliberate things people do when they're making a real decision. It just happened the way certain things happen. Gradually, then undeniably, the way a room gets warm when you've left the heat on without noticing. He had stopped pretending, at least to himself, that what he felt around Victoria Sterling was neighborly. He hadn't done anything about it. He wasn't sure he was going to. But the internal architecture of denial had finally given out, and now he was just a man who knew what he felt and was figuring out what, if anything, that meant. March in Ohio was ugly in the particular way that late winter is ugly. The snow gone gray and collapsing, the ground revealed underneath in its least flattering state, everything looking used up and waiting. Lily had moved through a brief phase of being annoyed by it and come out the other side with a new project, documenting the mud timeline, which involved photographing the same patch of backyard every few days to track when actual green would appear. She kept the photos in a folder on the tablet she'd been given for Christmas, labeled with dates, and periodically presented her findings to Ethan with the seriousness of a field researcher. She had also started presenting her findings to Victoria. This had become its own thing, Lily's standing appointment, which nobody had formally arranged, to update Victoria on the mud timeline, the diplomatic status of the snow map, and whatever else was occupying her 7-year-old attention. Victoria received these updates in her doorway or at their kitchen table or on her own porch on the rare warm days with the same steady attention she gave to board meetings, as far as Ethan could tell. She never looked like she was enduring it. She just looked present. Ethan watched this happen over several weeks and thought about what it meant that his daughter had quietly appointed this woman a permanent feature of her world without asking permission, with the absolute confidence of someone who had simply recognized a good thing. Lily was better at that than he was. The Saturday morning in mid-March, when everything started to change, had begun the same as most Saturdays. Ethan was in the kitchen making eggs. Lily was watching something on the tablet, cross-legged on the couch with her cereal, the kind of morning that had settled into its own rhythm without requiring anything from either of them. He was thinking about a work thing, a subcontractor issue he'd been managing for 3 weeks that still hadn't resolved, and the eggs were close to done when his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up without looking. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Then his eyes focused on the name, the one he didn't have saved because he'd told himself he didn't need it saved. "Hi, Ethan. It's Claire. I know this is out of nowhere. I'm going to be in Columbus next week for work. Would it be okay if I stopped by to see Lily? He stood there. The eggs started to smell like they'd been on too long, and he turned off the burner without thinking about it. He read it again. Out of nowhere. That part was accurate. Claire had been consistent about the arrangement. The bi-monthly phone calls with Lily, the occasional package in the mail, the careful and distant presence of a parent who had removed herself geographically but was making a measured effort not to disappear entirely. There had been no visits, not in 2 years. Lily had accepted this with the same factual neutrality she used for everything Claire-related, which Ethan suspected was not neutrality at all, but something more complicated that she hadn't found words for yet. He stared at the message for another few seconds. "Dad," Lily called from the couch, "are you burning the eggs?" "No." He looked at the pan. "Maybe. It smells like maybe." He scraped the eggs onto a plate, slightly overdone on one side. He brought it to Lily, who examined them and accepted them with the generosity of someone who had expected worse. He texted back, "Okay. Text me when you know the day." He put the phone face down on the counter. He stood there for a minute with his back to the living room, looking at the tiled backsplash he'd never liked, which had come with the house and which he'd never gotten around to doing anything about, and did the thing he always did when something Claire-shaped appeared in his life. Absorbed it, sealed it, kept moving. He was good at that. He'd had practice. What he didn't do was examine the particular quality of the sensation that arrived with it. Not quite dread, not quite old grief. More like the activation of a scar tissue. The way something that healed wrong can still twinge when the weather changes. Victoria noticed something was different that evening. Ethan wasn't sure what he'd given away. He'd come over to return a book she'd lent him, nothing unusual, and she'd been in the middle of something at her kitchen table, papers and a laptop, the standard equipment of her working life, and she'd looked up when he knocked, and something in how she looked at him shifted in the small, specific way it did when she was paying actual attention. "You okay?" she said. "Fine." "You have the face." He looked at her. "What face?" "The one where you've absorbed something and decided not to deal with it." He stood in her doorway for a second. He'd gotten used to her directness over the months, the absence of cushioning, the way she just said the thing, but it still occasionally landed on him like a door he hadn't known was there. "My ex-wife is coming to visit," he said. A pause. "For Lily?" "Yeah." "When?" "Thursday, maybe. She's not sure yet." Victoria nodded. She didn't ask anything further. She didn't offer an assessment or an opinion or any of the various forms of well-meaning input that people offered when an ex-spouse arrived unexpectedly. She just received it, filed it, let it be what it was. "You want coffee?" she said. He did, so he came in. They sat at her kitchen table with her papers pushed to one side, and they talked about other things. The book he'd returned, a thing Lily had said that week about the mud timeline, a news story he'd read. Easy, ordinary things. The kind of conversation that requires nothing extra and delivers something anyway. He left an hour later feeling more like himself than he had since the text arrived. He didn't analyze this. He just took it and went home. Claire arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Ethan had told Lily that morning, gently, without build-up, that her mom was coming today to see her. Lily had gone quiet in that specific way, the spoon held still above her cereal, processing something in the private interior way she had. Then she'd said, "For how long?" And Ethan said, "Just today, just the afternoon." And Lily had nodded once and returned to her cereal without further comment. He'd watched her at the door when he dropped her off at school, the way her shoulders carried something extra that day. He wanted to say something useful and couldn't find it, so he just made sure the jacket zipper was right and told her to have a good day, and she said she would and walked in. He worked badly that day. He caught 2 errors in his own spreadsheet by mid-morning, which was unusual, and Marcus had asked him twice if something was wrong, and Ethan had said no twice with diminishing conviction. He left early to get home before Claire arrived. He wanted to be there. He wasn't entirely sure why he needed to be there in a physical way, not just down the street but inside the house, standing in the kitchen, but he did. Claire pulled up at 4:15 in a rental car. Ethan watched from the window like a person who had been trying not to watch from the window. She looked the same and slightly different, the way people do when you haven't seen them in a substantial stretch of time. Her hair was shorter. She was in a good coat, gray, the kind of coat that said she was doing well. He opened the door before she knocked. "Hi," Claire said. "Hey." He stepped back. "Come in." She came in. She stood in his hallway and looked around with the contained expression of someone who was being careful about their reactions, and he recognized the look because he'd seen it on her face at other important moments. "It looks nice," she said, meaning the house. "It's fine," he said, meaning the same thing. The logistics of the afternoon were simple enough. Lily arrived home on the bus at 4:30, saw her mother, and went through a visible series of internal weather before settling on something that looked from the outside like cautious gladness. They hugged, Lily more than Claire, in the way children extend further than adults and reach back if the adult doesn't pull away. Claire didn't pull away. She held on. Ethan made himself tea he didn't need and stayed in the kitchen while they sat in the living room. And then, because he was not a man who could convincingly make himself invisible in his own house, he eventually came and sat down too. The three of them occupied the same room for the first time in 2 years. It was for the most part fine. This was the complicated thing about Claire. She wasn't a bad person. She had never been a bad person. She had been a person who wanted something different from what they had, and she had eventually said so. And the aftermath had been painful in the particular way that endings are painful when nobody did anything unforgivably wrong. You couldn't even stay angry properly. There was nothing solid to push against. Lily showed her the mud timeline, explaining it with slightly more restraint than she used with Victoria, which Ethan noticed and filed. She showed her the dinosaur corner drawings. She talked about school with measured enthusiasm. She was being, he realized, very careful, not cold, but curated, showing only the parts she decided were safe to show. He hated that Lily had learned that. He knew where she'd learned it. At some point, while Lily was getting something from her room, Claire looked at him. "She's doing well," Claire said. "She's great," Ethan said. He meant it as both an agreement and a slight correction. Not doing well. Great. There was a difference. "You've done a good job." He looked at his tea mug. "She makes it easy most days." Then, she said his name in the tone she used when she was about to say something real. He recognized the tone. "I'm serious, you—" She stopped, restarted. "I know it's not how either of us expected this to go, and I know it hasn't been easy." "It's fine, Claire. I'm just saying I see it." He looked at her. There was something genuinely meant in it. He knew that. He also knew that meant and useful were not the same thing, and that the particular mixture of guilt and care and relief in her voice was something he'd carried the weight of for 2 years, and he was tired of carrying it. "Thanks," he said. "Really?" He meant it mostly. Lily came back with a drawing she'd done of her mom from memory. Careful, a little stylized, capturing something true about the angle of her face, and gave it to her, and Claire held it in a way that showed she understood the significance of being drawn from memory. And Ethan looked out the window. The visit ended at 6:30. Claire hugged Lily for a long time at the door, and Lily let herself be held, and when the rental car pulled away, Lily stood on the porch for a moment and watched it go. Ethan stood beside her. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything that wouldn't land wrong. After a minute, Lily said, "She has a nice coat." "Yeah," Ethan said, "not as nice as Victoria's." He looked down at her. "Okay," he said. "Inside. It's cold." They went inside. The conversation happened on Saturday. Ethan hadn't planned for it. He didn't know that Claire had been running her own calculations about the visit, or that she'd sat in that rental car driving back to Columbus working through something she'd apparently been meaning to say for a while. He didn't know she was going to call. Lily was at a friend's birthday party down the street, which meant the house was quiet in the specific, large-feeling way it got when Lily wasn't in it. Ethan was doing the kind of nothing that single parents do when they have unexpected free time. Sitting in the kitchen, not quite reading, not quite resting, just existing in the temporary absence of immediate obligation. His phone rang. Claire. "Hey," he said. "Hey, you have a minute?" A pause. He had 11 minutes, realistically, before he needed to go pick up Lily, but something in her tone made him not mention that. "Yeah," he said. She started talking, and it was careful and considered, and he could tell she'd organized it in her head before dialing. She said she thought the visit had been good, and that Lily looked happy, and that she was glad Ethan had let her come. She said some things about the custody arrangement that he listened to without responding because they were fine and didn't require response. She said she was glad he'd made a good life here. And then, because Claire had never been able to fully separate what was useful from what she needed to say, she said, "I saw you with that woman, the neighbor." He went still. "I was walking back to my car," she said. "You were, I don't know, you were on the porch. She was in the yard, and I saw how you were looking at her." He said nothing. "Ethan," a pause. "I want to be honest with you, okay? Not to hurt you, but because I think you need to hear it from someone who knows you." "Claire, you're a good man. I know that. But you've always been the kind of person who, you give everything to the people around you and you don't think about what you need. And a woman like that," she stopped. "Someone like her, she's in a different world. She has different expectations, different needs. And I don't want you to build something in your head and then have it, Claire, hurt Lily. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying think about Lily." He sat with the phone at his ear. The kitchen was very quiet. "I know you mean well," he said. "I do. I know." He pressed the heel of his hand against the table. "But I need you to hear something too. What you're describing, me giving everything without getting anything, that was about us, about what we were. You don't get to keep defining me by that." A pause, longer than he expected. "You're right," she said quietly, "and I'm not doing anything. She's a neighbor, that's all." He said it automatically, the way he said it to himself. It felt exactly as unconvincing as it always did. "Okay," Claire said. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's fine," he said. "I have to go get Lily." He hung up. He sat in the kitchen for another minute. He could feel the old sentences moving in him, the ones he'd been carrying so long they'd worn grooves. Good man. Never quite enough. Different world, different expectations. He'd heard them in different arrangements over the years, from different mouths, but they always added up to the same word. Limited. That was the word underneath all of it. You have limits. You are limited. He had spent 2 years not letting himself want things that would test that limit. He sat with it. He let it be ugly for a minute. Then he went to pick up Lily. What Ethan didn't know was that the phone call had happened 70 feet from where Victoria was standing. She hadn't been trying to listen. She'd been on her own porch with a coffee and her phone, dealing with an email about the Columbus acquisition, when she'd stepped down into the yard to check the gutter she'd noticed was pulling loose on her own house, irony not lost on her, and she'd heard voices. Specifically, she'd heard, "You're a good man," and then, "A woman like that. Different world." And then Ethan's voice, lower, saying something she couldn't fully make out, but the register of it clear. Not angry, which she might have expected. Controlled, contained. The particular voice of a person absorbing something familiar. She hadn't heard everything. She'd heard enough to understand the shape of it. She'd gone back inside. She stood in her kitchen for a long time after, thinking about what she'd heard and what she knew and what she'd been careful not to say. She thought about the way Ethan moved through the world, the consistent, quiet undercutting of himself that he probably didn't know he did. The way he reflexively softened his own qualities. "I'm figuring it out. It's fine. It's nothing. It's just soup." The way he received any specific acknowledgement of his competence or character with visible discomfort, like a person who'd been told so many times they weren't quite enough that they'd stopped knowing how to hear the opposite. She'd recognized that in him early. She'd been careful not to push because she understood, from her own experience in different territory, what happened when you push someone towards something they weren't ready to receive. It either scared them off or it built something on unstable ground, and neither outcome was what she wanted. But hearing it from outside, hearing it described by the person who'd apparently installed the voice in his head, made something sharpen in her. Not anger, exactly. Something more like clarity. She knew what she wanted. She'd known for months. She'd been patient the way she was patient about things she actually intended to see through. Strategic, not waiting. But there was a question she hadn't been able to answer, and it mattered. Did Ethan believe on any workable level that he was worth wanting? Because what she'd heard through that phone call suggested the answer might be no. And that was a problem that she alone could not solve for him. The week after Claire's visit, Ethan changed. Not dramatically. Not in any way that Lily noticed or that showed up in his daily logistics. He still made the breakfast and drove the routes and managed the spreadsheets. He still texted Victoria, less often and briefer, the kind of messages that fulfilled the technical definition of a conversation without going anywhere real. He told himself he was being sensible. He told himself he was pulling back to a reasonable distance, the kind of distance that made sense when you thought about it clearly. Victoria Sterling was temporary. She had a 6-month assignment in Millbrook. She had a life in a different orbit, board meetings and London calls and buildings with elaborate iron fire escapes that she photographed because they were interesting. Ethan had a turkey sandwich on Thursdays and a daughter who measured the world in dinosaurs and a gutter that kept pulling loose. He told himself Claire wasn't wrong about the basics, even if she'd been wrong to say it. The different worlds thing, the different expectations thing. He told himself it was reasonable caution, not old damage. He was lying to himself with great precision. Victoria noticed by Wednesday. She didn't say anything immediately. She sat with it the way she sat with most things, watching, gathering information, not moving until she understood what she was moving toward. The texts were shorter. He hadn't come over. When she'd knocked one evening to return a container she'd borrowed, he'd been pleasant and warm, and there had been a door between them that hadn't been there in months. Not a literal door, but something. On Thursday, she texted, "Did something happen?" He took a long time to respond. "Just busy. Work stuff." She looked at that for a while. Then, "Okay." She let it sit for 2 days. The thing about Ethan pulling back was that it clarified something for her. Not about what she wanted, she'd known that. About what she was willing to do about it. She had spent her professional life making decisions that other people found aggressive by choosing to move directly toward what she wanted without elaborate apology for wanting it. In her personal life, she'd been less practiced at this. She'd waited in past situations, for James, for others before him, and waiting had turned into its own kind of loss. You waited, and time passed, and the moment passed with it, and later you couldn't quite reconstruct what you'd been so careful about. She was 30 years old. She was not interested in reconstructing this later. But she also understood that what was happening with Ethan wasn't about her. The withdrawal wasn't indifference. She'd been paying attention long enough to know the difference between someone who didn't care and someone who was scared. Ethan was scared. Specifically scared of the things she could see clearly from the outside, that he had arranged his entire inner life around the belief that he was a man who didn't quite qualify for the things he actually wanted. She couldn't fix that. She knew she couldn't fix that, but she could say something true. Bam. The Friday evening 3 weeks after Claire's visit was the kind of evening that had no particular drama in it. Lily was in bed. Ethan was in the kitchen, not quite doing anything. The text came at 8:47. "Victoria, I'm going to knock on your door in 5 minutes. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I'd rather you did." He stared at it. He typed, "Okay." He stood in the kitchen for 5 minutes and did not do anything. Then there was a knock. He opened the door. She was in jeans and a dark sweater and no coat because she'd only come from next door. No coffee, no borrowed item, no practical reason. She just stood there. "Can I come in?" she said. "Yeah." He stepped back. She came in. She didn't sit down, not at first. She stood in his kitchen, the same kitchen where they'd had coffee over a book conversation, where Lily had explained the snow map, where he'd made too much chili and taken it next door. And she looked at him with the particular quality of attention she had, and she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just absorb it and file it." He looked at her. Something in his chest pulled tight. "Okay," he said. "I've been paying attention to you since October," she said. Not as a confession, as a statement of fact. Not because I was lonely or bored or because you were convenient. I live next door to a lot of people. I don't do this with people I live next to. He opened his mouth. She held up a hand, not sharply, just, let me finish. I started paying attention because you're someone worth paying attention to. And over the past 5 months, I've figured out enough about you to know that you don't believe that. And I don't know who taught you not to believe it, but I have a guess. And I think you've been living inside that guess for a long time and calling it realism. The kitchen was very quiet. Victoria, you pulled back, she said, after Claire's visit. I don't know exactly what was said. I heard a little, not enough. But I know what it sounded like on your end because I've been watching you discount yourself for 5 months. And I'm not going to tell you how to feel, but I need you to know that whatever she said, whatever voice is in your head saying you're not someone worth choosing, that voice is not accurate. He stood at his kitchen counter. He had both hands flat on it, the way he did when he needed something solid. You don't know everything about me, he said. I know enough. I'm not... He stopped. Started again. My life is not... I know what your life is, she said, and the steadiness of it. No impatience, no performance, landed somewhere in him that he didn't entirely have defenses for. I've been in it. I know about the sad Thursday sandwiches. He stared. How do you know about... Marcus told me. He mentioned it at the school showcase. I was talking to him for about 3 minutes while you were looking at Lily's collage. She didn't smile at this. The point is, I know the Thursday sandwiches and the too short ladder and the gutter and the door key and how you check Lily's seatbelt twice every single time. I know you read books the way people eat, like they're genuinely necessary. I know you made chili in November for no reason except you made too much and thought about whether I'd had dinner. I know all of that. He looked at her. And I'm standing here, she said, because I want to. Not because I'm confused about what I want or because I'm filling something in. I've thought about this for months. I'm not impulsive. I know you're not. Then hear me. The words landed clean and direct, and he stood there receiving them. And the old voice was still there. It didn't disappear. It doesn't work like that. But it was suddenly competing with something else. Something that had her face and her stillness and the specific weight of someone who had looked at all of it and was still there. He said, I'm scared. Not dressed up, just that. She said, I know. I spent a long time believing something about myself, and I can't just... I'm not asking you to just anything, she said. I'm not asking you for a decision right now. I'm asking you to stop treating your own life like a thing you don't qualify for. He pressed his tongue to the back of his teeth. His jaw was tight. He was doing the thing where he held himself very still, because if he moved, he wasn't sure what he'd do. You're very direct, he said. I know, she said. It works better than the alternative. A pause. A long one. The kitchen settled around them. I heard you, he said finally. She looked at him for a second. Okay. I can't promise. You don't have to promise anything. She picked up her keys from where she'd set them on the counter, a small gesture he hadn't noticed, and then stopped. You're not a project to me, Ethan. You're not someone I'm trying to fix. I want to be clear about that. Okay? I just wanted to say the actual thing. She moved toward the door. Because apparently I've been thinking about it long enough that it needed to come out. He followed her to the door. She pulled it open. Cold air came in. She turned. For what it's worth, he said. What you said? About Lily. His voice was slightly different, and he knew she could hear that. She drew you in the collage. Victoria looked at him. That small shift in her face. The one that wasn't quite a smile but lived near it. I know, she said. I still have the photo. She left. He stood in his open doorway and watched her cross the yard and go inside. He stood in the cold air for longer than was practical. The old voice was still there. He could hear it, but it was quieter now. Or maybe it was the same volume and everything else had gotten louder. He went inside. He stood in his kitchen for a long time. He thought about what she'd said. Stop treating your life like a thing you don't qualify for. He thought about 2 years of maintenance, of function, of good enough, of the box that kept not closing, of the snow map and the ankylosaur and the colored light through Lily's window at night and all the ordinary moments of the past 5 months that had added up, without his permission, into something he recognized as actually living. He thought about being afraid. He sat with that honestly. It was real. It was not going away because someone had said true things at him in his kitchen on a Friday night. But there was something underneath the fear that hadn't been there before, or that he hadn't been able to locate before. Small and stubborn. The part of him that had listened to her and felt, underneath all the careful management of his own expectations, something that could only be described as, she's right. Not about everything, not in every particular, but about the voice, about where it came from, about the long, quiet cost of living inside someone else's assessment of you. He was not going to fix that tonight. He understood that. This was not the part of the story where things resolved cleanly. He still had the scar tissue and the grooves worn into his thinking and the specific fear of being wrong about himself in a direction that cost someone else. But he had also heard her. He had actually heard her. And in his kitchen, alone, with Lily asleep down the hall and Victoria's light on in the window, he could see from his sink something that had been sealed for a long time cracked slightly open. Not enough to call it anything yet, but enough to feel the air. The silence that followed Claire's departure was the loudest thing in Ethan's house in a long time. He stood in the kitchen for several minutes after her car pulled out of the driveway. He didn't move. He heard Lily upstairs. The particular sound of her feet crossing the floor to her bathroom, the water running, the familiar rhythm of bedtime happening on its own. And he was grateful that she was contained up there, behind a closed door, away from whatever was sitting in this kitchen with him now. He pulled out a chair and sat down. The coffee mugs were still on the counter. He'd never poured them. They were cold now. He looked at them and thought, absently, about the motion of putting them in the sink and rinsing them, but he didn't move. He just sat. You were never someone who could hold the attention of a woman who had real options. He turned the sentence over in his head the way you press on a bruise. Not because you want it to hurt, but because you can't quite stop checking if it still does. It did. Not because Claire was right. He understood in the clear-headed part of himself that what she'd said was delivered from a place of old bitterness, of someone who needed him to be a smaller thing so her own story made more sense. He understood that. He had enough distance from the marriage to understand it. But understanding something and not feeling it are two entirely different operations, and he had never managed to close the gap between them cleanly. The problem with old wounds is that they don't need new knives. They just need someone to press the old scar hard enough. He thought about Victoria. He thought about the last few months, the texts, the evenings, the hot chocolate, and the snow map in the school showcase. He thought about the way she looked at him, that particular quality of attention she had. He thought about what it had started to feel like to believe in it, and then he heard Claire's voice again, a woman like that. The box he'd been keeping things in, the one that had refused to close properly since December, slammed shut. Well, he was not dramatic about it. That wasn't his style. There was no moment where he made a decision and felt it click into place. It was more like the slow, automatic closing of a system that had learned to protect itself. He texted Victoria the next morning. Something short and practical. A response to something she'd sent the previous afternoon that he hadn't answered, about a book she thought Lily might like. He answered it, kept it brief, moved on. It felt like normal behavior. It was not normal behavior. Over the next few days, he made himself busy. This was not difficult because he was always genuinely busy, but there is a kind of busyness that comes from engagement and a kind that comes from avoiding, and he understood which kind this was. He stayed at work later than necessary. He ran errands he'd been putting off. When Lily asked if Victoria was coming over for dinner Thursday, like she sometimes did, he said Victoria was probably working and changed the subject. Lily looked at him for a second with that specific watchful look she had, the one she'd gotten from somewhere he couldn't identify, and which occasionally made him feel transparent in ways that were uncomfortable. And then she said, "Okay," in a tone that was not entirely convinced. He told himself he was being sensible. He told himself he was doing the right thing, the careful thing, the thing that protected both of them from the inevitable correction of whatever story he'd been half building in his head. Victoria was a billionaire. She was accomplished and driven and had lived in rooms that didn't exist in his vocabulary. She would finish her work here in Millbrook, Ohio, and she would go back to wherever she was supposed to be, and whatever he'd been allowing himself to imagine would resolve itself into what it had always been, a friendly neighbor who had been kind to him. He told himself these things. He believed them about 60% of the time. The other 40% was harder to manage. Victoria noticed on day 2, she was practiced at reading patterns in data. It was one of the actual skills that had built her career, not the headline version people used in profiles, but the real version. The ability to sit with information and identify when something had changed direction. Numbers did it, markets did it, people did it. Ethan had been warm and she had learned the specific frequency of his warmth, the response time on texts, the way he would linger at a conversation instead of cutting it short, the small, unguarded things he said when he'd stopped editing himself. She knew the baseline well enough to recognize the departure from it. He was pulling back. She didn't say anything. That was not her instinct. Her instinct was to observe first, identify cause before response, avoid the reactive move that addressed the symptom instead of the thing underneath. She knew Claire had come to the house. She hadn't planned to overhear what she'd overheard. She'd been coming around the side of her house to check a window she thought she'd left open, and the voices had carried and she had stopped. She'd heard the end of it, not all of it, but enough. You were never someone who could hold the attention of a woman who had real options. Victoria had stood very still for a moment. Then she'd gone back inside her own front door and stood in her hallway for a while, thinking. She thought about what that sentence would do to a man like Ethan. Not a fragile man, not a weak one, but a man who had already decided somewhere in his private architecture that he was not quite enough, that the verdict on him had been rendered, that the smart thing was to want only what he could hold without reaching. She thought about what it would do when the source of the sentence was someone he'd once believed in, someone whose opinion had once carried weight. She thought, I should have knocked on his door that night. She hadn't. She'd told herself it wasn't her place. She'd told herself to wait, to give him room, that he would work through it. She watched him disappear into his house for 3 days, and she gave him room, and it cost her something she wouldn't name. By day 5 of the quiet, she stopped giving him room. She wasn't reckless about it. She wasn't going to show up at his door with a prepared speech or a confession that would put him in the position of having to respond to something he hadn't asked for. She wasn't built like that. She thought about it for 2 evenings, identified what needed to happen, and chose her moment with the same care she brought to anything that mattered. It was a Thursday evening. She'd seen his kitchen light on. She'd seen Lily's bedroom light go out 20 minutes later. She gave it another 10 minutes, finished her tea, put on her coat, and went next door. She knocked. A beat of silence. Then footsteps. Then Ethan opened the door. He looked the way people look when they've been sitting alone with something heavy for several days. Functional, put together, but with a kind of compression around the eyes that comes from holding too much in a space that wasn't built to hold it. He looked at her, and something crossed his face that was there and gone too fast to catch. Surprise, maybe. Or the look of someone who had been dreading and wanting something at the same time. Hey, he said, can I come in? A pause. Not long, but not nothing. Yeah, he said. Yeah, come in. He stepped back and she came inside. The kitchen light was on, the living room lamp, and the television was running low in the corner, playing something he probably wasn't watching. The coffee mugs, well, she noticed there were 2 of them on the counter, both clean, which meant he'd made coffee and then made more coffee, which was what he did when he was working something out in his head. She knew the coffee thing. She'd noticed it over the winter. You want some? He asked, nodding at the mugs. Sure. He poured. She sat at the kitchen table without being asked, because she'd sat at this table enough times that it didn't require an invitation anymore. He set a mug in front of her and sat across from her with his own. The quiet sat between them for a moment. I heard some of what Claire said, she said. He went still. I wasn't trying to, she said. I was outside. I should have announced myself. He looked at his coffee. She watched him do the thing where he tried to decide how to answer. She'd learned this about him too, the slight pause before he spoke when a conversation had moved into territory that required him to be careful. It's fine, he said. I don't think it is. Victoria, you've been different for 5 days. He looked up. She met it directly. She had learned how to hold a room's tension, how to let things sit without rushing them, but this was harder than a boardroom. This was harder than most things she could name. "I'm fine," he said. "You've been avoiding me." A beat. He didn't deny it. "I thought it was probably better," he said finally. He said it to the table. "Better how?" He was quiet for a second. He turned the mug in his hands, not drinking from it, just holding it. She waited. "She wasn't wrong," he said. "About what specifically?" He looked at her, and there was something in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not quite raw, but close. The kind of expression that emerges when the thing a person has been managing stops being manageable. "About you," he said. "About what this has been, whatever this is." "What do you think it is?" "I think it's you being kind," he said. "I think you're generous, and you've been generous to me and Lily, and I think I let myself—" He stopped, started again. "I read something into it that wasn't there, and Claire just—" Another stop. She said the quiet part out loud. "That's all." Victoria looked at him for a moment. She thought about what she was going to say next, and she thought about how to say it. She had spent months being strategic about this, careful, measured, not wanting to push him into something he wasn't ready for, not wanting to overwrite his autonomy with her own certainty. She had given him space and time and the slow accumulation of just being present without demanding anything. She thought, enough of that. "What did she say exactly?" Victoria asked. "About me." Ethan looked at the table. "That you're a woman with real options," he said, "and that I was never someone who could hold that kind of attention, that I'd mistake kindness for something it wasn't." He said it quietly, like he'd been turning the words over for 5 days and they'd worn smooth. "She knows me pretty well, historically." "She knows who you were during a marriage that was failing," Victoria said. "That's not the same thing." "It's closer than you think." "Ethan." She waited until he looked at her. "She needs you to be what she described. Because if you're not, if you're actually someone worth choosing, then leaving you was a different kind of thing than she's been telling herself." He was very still. "She's not lying because she's cruel," Victoria said. "She's lying because the truth is inconvenient for her." He looked at her for a long time. She could see him testing the sentence, measuring it against what he knew, against the 5-day wait he'd been carrying. She could see the place where he wanted to believe it and the place where he was afraid to. "You don't know that," he said. "I know what I've seen," she said, "for 5 months." The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the street, headlights moving across the window and gone. The refrigerator made its usual settling sound in the corner. These small noises that meant nothing, that were just the house being a house. Ethan looked at the woman sitting across his kitchen table. He thought about the accumulation of 5 months. He thought about the snow and the shovels and the hot chocolate and the festive ankylosaur. He thought about texts at 11:30 and books he'd finished in one sitting and the way she'd said, "I wanted to come at the school showcase." Direct. No apology around it. He thought about what it had cost him to keep not believing it. "Why?" he said. She looked at him. "Why are you here?" he said. "Not tonight specifically. I mean, why Caldwell Street? Why the groceries and the hammer and all of it?" He put the mug down. "You could live anywhere. You could have anything, Victoria. Any version of a life you wanted. Why?" He ran a hand over his face, frustrated with himself for not having a better way to say it. "Why would you want this?" She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating. She wasn't someone who hesitated, but choosing, the way she chose things. "Do you want the practical answer or the real one?" she said. "The real one." She put both hands around her mug, looked at it for a second, then back at him. "I've been in rooms with very impressive people my entire adult life," she said. "I mean that literally. Boardrooms, fundraising dinners, acquisition meetings. I've sat across from people with extraordinary credentials and significant power, and I've watched almost all of them, at some point, behave in ways that were about being seen, about being confirmed, about making sure the room knew what they were worth." She paused. I got used to reading for that. It's almost automatic now. You walk in and you start tracking. What does this person need people to think of them? What are they managing? He was listening. Not the polite kind of listening, actually in it. The first morning I saw you, she said, you were in your driveway fixing Lily's jacket zipper. She was talking and you were listening and there was no one else there, no audience, and you were just there, fully there, doing the thing because it needed doing. He looked at her. She kept going. And every time after that, the grocery bags, the shoveling, the way you talked to her, the chili that you brought over because you made too much and you thought I might want some. You never... She stopped, worked out how to say the next part. You never once tried to manage what I thought of you. You were just yourself. The actual version, every time. He didn't say anything. You know how rare that is, she said. I mean, actually rare. I have spent 10 years in proximity to people with every possible resource and advantage, and most of them are performing something, most of the time. And you just aren't. You're just Ethan, with the sad Thursday sandwich and the too many grocery bags and the key that needs the handle trick. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. You know about the Thursday sandwich? Marcus told me, she said, and then registered his expression. We talked once at a neighborhood thing while you were at Lily's school pickup. He's very forthcoming. I'm going to speak to Marcus. Don't. I liked it. She leaned forward slightly. That's the thing, Ethan. I liked all of it. Not in spite of it being ordinary, because of it. Because it was real, and it was yours, and none of it was performed for anybody. He looked at her. He sat with what she'd said for a moment, not rushing to respond, not batting it away. You could have told me that, he said. His voice was quieter now. Before. Any of the last 5 months. I know. Why didn't you? She was quiet for a beat. Because I wasn't sure you'd believe it, she said. And I thought if I said it too early, you'd find a way to explain it away. I thought I needed you to see it first. Through the things I did rather than the things I said. He rubbed his jaw. That's very strategic of you. I told you. Strategic and patient are different things. Yeah, you did. He looked at the table. I thought about that, actually. I know. He looked up. You knew I thought about it? You wrote back maybe when you could have just written goodnight. That told me something. He stared at her for a second. You're very observant. I pay attention to things that matter to me. The sentence landed quietly in the kitchen between them, and he let it land, and he didn't immediately reach for the deflection that would have come naturally 5 days ago, or 5 months ago, or 2 years ago, when he'd first started building the version of himself that didn't ask for things he wasn't sure he could hold. He sat with it instead. He thought about what she'd said, not the Claire part, not the strategic part, but the specific thing about what she'd seen in him, the thing about being present, about not performing. He didn't know if he'd earned those words or not. He knew he'd spent 2 years trying to do the right thing in a life that required a lot from him, with not much acknowledgement, and he'd stopped expecting acknowledgement. And then here was someone who had been watching the whole time and had something specific to say about it. He thought, what does it cost you to believe her? And for the first time, the honest answer wasn't everything. It was something smaller, something survivable. Can I tell you what I'm afraid of? He said. Yes. I'm afraid that what you see is the surface of it, he said. The decent version. The version that shows up and does the things. And that he stopped. That at some point you'd see the other parts, the parts that aren't showing up. The nights I don't know what I'm doing. The times I lose patience with Lily for something that isn't her fault. The fact that I've been inside my own head for 5 days instead of just asking you what was real. He pressed his hands flat on the table. Claire knew those parts too, and she made her call. Victoria looked at him steadily. What was the worst thing you did in the marriage? She said. He blinked. What? Not to Claire specifically, just what's the thing about yourself during that time that you think about most? He was quiet. She waited. I checked out, he said finally. Not all at once, gradually. I stopped initiating things. Stopped trying to build things with her. I just maintained. I kept everything running, and I convinced myself that was enough, and I didn't notice until it was too late that she was disappearing from the marriage because I'd made the marriage too small to stay in. He said it quietly, with the particular flatness of something told the truth about rather than confessed. Victoria nodded. "That's a real thing," she said. "Yeah. That's someone who learned to survive by keeping his life manageable," she said. "Not someone fundamentally incapable of showing up." "That's a generous reading." "It's an accurate one." She paused. "And you know what I notice? You just told me your worst thing, without me pulling it out of you, without making it smaller than it is. You just said it." He looked at her. "That's not nothing," she said. "That's actually a lot." He exhaled slowly. Something in his shoulders came down slightly. "I don't know how to do this," he said, not helplessly, just honestly. "Whatever this would be, I don't know how to—" He gestured vaguely. "You are who you are, Victoria. That's not nothing either. Your whole life is a different scale than mine." "My professional life is," she said. "That's not the same thing." "People would see it that way." "Which people?" "Everyone." "I don't live for everyone," she said. "I haven't for a long time." A pause. "And neither do you. You live for Lily and for the work you care about and for the specific small things that make a day worth having. That's not a limitation. That's knowing what matters." He looked at the table. She could see him working through something, the internal machinery of a man trying to update a belief system that had been in place for years. She didn't rush it. She had gotten very good at not rushing things. "Lily likes you," he said. "I know." "She drew you into her home collage." "I know that too." "With the shovel." The red shovel specifically. Something moved across her face. "I looked at that collage for a long time." "What did you think?" She was quiet for a second, then, "I thought that a 7-year-old was seeing something clearly that her father was working very hard not to see." He looked up. "And I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I thought that being drawn into someone's idea of what home feels like is one of the better things that's happened to me in a long time." The kitchen was quiet. He looked at her, really looked at her, in the way he'd been avoiding for 5 days. She looked back. No management in it, no performance. Just the same quality of attention she'd had from the first week, steady and specific and pointed directly at him. "I've been looking at myself through her eyes," he said quietly. "Claire's. For years. Even after. Even when I told myself I wasn't. I know. She's not right about me." "No," Victoria said. "She's not." He exhaled. It came from somewhere deep. "I don't know how to be a man who has—" He stopped, tried again. "I don't know how to want things again. I used to know. I think I locked it out somewhere along the way." "You want things," she said. "You've been wanting things for 5 months and doing the thing where you immediately put them away. You saw that. I watched you put things away every time. And you stayed. And I stayed," she said. Simple. Final. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. He thought about the box that wouldn't close. He thought about the 40%. He thought about snow maps and food coloring and what home feels like rendered in construction paper by a 7-year-old who noticed things. "I don't want to be someone who makes you small," he said. "Like I did in the marriage. I don't want to—" Stop. Her voice was gentle but definite. "You're doing it again." "What?" "You're building the case against yourself, preemptively, before anything has even happened." He blinked. "You're so worried about being the version that failed that you're not letting yourself be the version that learned from it," she said. "Those aren't the same person, Ethan." He sat with that. She leaned forward slightly. "The man who checked out of a marriage is the reason you're sitting here telling me about it honestly, instead of defending yourself. You saw it. You learned from it. That's the version I've been watching for 5 months." She paused. "The one who fixes the jacket zipper, who remembers the orange juice, who makes chili for the neighbor he doesn't really know yet because he made too much and thought she might want some." Her voice was quieter now. "That guy. I want to know that guy. I've been knowing that guy and I want to keep knowing him." He looked at her for a long time. She looked back. Okay, he said. She waited. Okay, he said again, differently, like he was saying it to himself as much as to her, like something was unclenching. She didn't smile right away. She just held the moment, let it be what it was. Then she said, "That took 5 months." "I know." A beat. Something shifted in his face. "I'm slow." "You're careful." "You're being generous again." "I'm being accurate again," she said. And this time he let it land without arguing. They sat at the kitchen table for another hour after that, not talking about the heavy things anymore. Those had been said, and they needed space to settle, and neither of them was the kind of person who felt the need to fill every silence with more words. They talked about the book she'd just started. He told her about the project at work that had gone sideways that week, the contractor situation, the deadline. She asked specific questions because she was actually interested and not because she was performing interest. He answered them fully because something had opened in him, and the usual impulse to minimize was quieter than normal. At some point, she got up to rinse her mug, and he watched her move around his kitchen with the comfort of someone who had been there enough times that it wasn't foreign territory anymore. And he thought about what she'd said, being drawn into someone's idea of what home feels like. He thought about that for a while. When she picked up her coat from the chair, he walked her to the door. She pulled it on and picked up her keys from where she'd set them on the entry table. She'd done that automatically, the way you do in places that have become familiar, and turned at the door. "Ethan." "Yeah." "Ask me something," she said. "Something real. Something you've been not asking." He looked at her. He thought about what was real. He thought about what he'd been not asking. "Are you staying?" he said. "In Millbrook, when the work is done." She looked at him. He watched her think about it. Not performing deliberation, actually thinking. The real version. "I have an office in Columbus," she said. 40 minutes from here. I've been commuting from the New York office for years. I don't actually have to be in New York." A pause. "I've been thinking about that for a while." "Before or after you moved to Caldwell Street?" Her mouth moved. "After." "How long after?" "About 3 weeks." He calculated. 3 weeks after she moved in. Late October. Around the time of the school, the jacket, the front porch morning, he thought 3 weeks. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She opened the door. The cold came in from outside. She stepped onto the porch and turned back once more. "The orange juice," she said. "For Lily. You're out again. I have extra. I'll put it on your step tomorrow morning." He stared at her. "How do you know I'm out of orange juice?" "Lily texted me." "Lily is 7. She has strong communication instincts," Victoria said. "You should look into that diplomat thing seriously." She went down the porch steps. He stood in the open door and watched her cross the small, dark strip of lawn between their houses, and she went inside without looking back, and her light came on. He stood in his doorway for a moment in the cold. He thought about the door, about the first night, the key that needed the handle trick, and her standing on the sidewalk with her coffee watching him fail at it 3 times before she said something. He thought about how she'd framed it, not as a correction, but as a thing that might help. Sometimes it helps if you lift the handle a little while you turn. He thought about all of it. Every piece of the last 5 months, laid end to end. He thought about the collage, what home feels like. He put his hand on the doorframe. The cold was real and sharp and present, and he stood in it for one more moment, letting himself feel it, letting himself be here, in this specific place and this specific life, with all its accumulations and all the things it had quietly become. Then he stepped back inside. He lifted the handle and turned the key, and the door clicked shut. He stood in his entryway in the quiet of his house, with the living room lamp on and the television still going low and Lily asleep upstairs, and he let himself want the thing he'd been not wanting for 5 months. He let it be real. He stood there and let it be real for a whole minute without putting it away. It didn't feel like what he'd expected. It didn't feel like certainty exactly, or like something clicking into place with clean finality. It felt more like putting down something heavy that he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped noticing the weight. It felt like that. And in the quiet of his kitchen on an ordinary Thursday night in Ohio, with orange juice arriving on his steps in the morning and a daughter asleep upstairs who had understood something he was still catching up to, Ethan Cross unclenched the last thing he'd been holding tight and breathed. The orange juice was on the step when he opened the door Friday morning. He almost didn't see it. He was running 4 minutes behind because Lily had decided that Friday required a different hairstyle than the rest of the week and had spent 12 minutes in front of the bathroom mirror with a level of commitment that he respected but could not always accommodate. He pushed the door open, already calculating the drive time, and nearly kicked it. He stopped, looked down. A full half-gallon of orange juice, the good kind, with pulp because Lily had recently decided pulp was important. There was a Post-it note stuck to the top, slightly crinkled from the cold. Lily said, "The kind with pulp." He stood in the doorway for a moment. He was aware that this was a small thing. He was also aware that small things, by this point in the story of his life, were not actually small. He picked it up and brought it inside and put it in the refrigerator and poured Lily a glass and set it on the table without saying anything about where it came from. Lily sat down, saw the glass, and said, "Victoria got the right kind." "How did you know it was from Victoria?" "Because you were out and you didn't go to the store." She drank her orange juice. "Also, I texted her." "I know you texted her." "Good." She set the glass down. "Did you talk to her?" He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, with her mother's eyes and her own particular frequency of perception that occasionally made him feel like he was the child. "Yeah," he said. "We talked." Lily nodded once, satisfied, the way she nodded when something she already knew had been confirmed. "Good," she said again, and went back to her breakfast. He drove her to school. She wore the different hairstyle. 2 braids this time, slightly uneven because he'd done them, and he was not skilled at this. And she said they were close enough, which was as close to a compliment as she gave on the hairstyle front. At the drop-off, she hopped out and then leaned back in, the way she always did. "Dad?" "Yeah." "I'm glad you talked to her." He looked at his daughter. "Me too, Lily." She shut the door and went to school. He sat in the pickup line for a moment after the car behind him honked and reminded him to move. He moved. He didn't see Victoria that Friday evening or on Saturday morning. He thought about texting her and didn't, and then thought about why he didn't and recognized it as an old reflex. The one that said, "Don't be too much. Don't move too fast. Don't show your hand before you've decided it's safe." He recognized the reflex for what it was now. He still had to fight it. That was the thing about understanding your patterns. Understanding them didn't make them disappear. It just made you aware you were choosing them. He chose differently. He texted her Saturday afternoon. "Thank you for the orange juice. Lily said you got the right kind." Her response came back in 2 minutes. She was very specific in her instructions. She usually is. "It's a good quality," Victoria wrote. "The specificity." "Takes after her old man," he wrote, and then looked at it and thought, "That was a flirt. I just flirted." He felt briefly absurd and then sent it anyway. A pause. Then, "It does, actually." He sat with that. Something that had been clenched for a long time, for years maybe, unclenched another degree. "Do you want to come over Sunday?" he wrote. "Lily wants to make pancakes and she needs a third opinion on whether the blueberries go in the batter or on top." That's a serious question. She has a whole position on it. "I'm Switzerland." "I'll be there," Victoria wrote. "I have strong feelings about blueberries. She'll be delighted." "What about you?" He smiled at his phone. "I'll manage," he wrote. Her response was just a period, which he somehow understood exactly. The blueberry pancake debate was, as promised, serious. Lily's position was that blueberries in the batter resulted in uneven distribution and a compromised structural situation she called the wet pocket problem. Victoria's position, delivered after approximately 30 seconds of consideration, was that the wet pocket problem was actually where the best flavor lived and should be considered a feature rather than a flaw. Ethan made coffee and stayed neutral, which was cowardice dressed as diplomacy, and both of them told him so at the same moment, using different words. "You're Switzerland," Lily said. I'm Switzerland, he confirmed. Switzerland eventually has to pick a side, Victoria said. I don't think that's how Switzerland works. In this kitchen it is, Lily said, and Victoria pointed at her in agreement, and Ethan poured his coffee and recognized that he was outnumbered in a way that felt entirely different from being alone. They made the pancakes with the blueberries in the batter. Victoria oversaw this with the focused attention she gave to things she'd decided to do properly. Lily narrated every step. Ethan handled the griddle because that was the one part neither of them would let the other control, which suited him fine because it gave him a reason to stand at the stove with his back partly turned, where he could listen to Lily and Victoria talk without having to manage his own expression. He heard Lily explain the current status of the snow map nations, which had persisted in her imagination well past the actual snow. He heard Victoria ask the right questions, not indulgent questions, real ones, questions that built on previous answers. He heard Lily say, at one point, with the complete sincerity that 7-year-olds deploy without any awareness of weight, I like it when you're here. He heard Victoria say, quieter, I like being here. He flipped a pancake. He kept his face neutral. He was not entirely successful. They ate at the kitchen table. The blueberry and batter position was vindicated by the results, which Victoria accepted with a dignity that Lily found appropriately gracious. Outside the window, it was the gray-bright kind of March day that Ohio produces between winter and real spring, the sky still deciding, the air cold enough to wear a coat, but with something underneath it that suggested the temperature had made a private commitment to eventually improve. It was ordinary. It was the most ordinary Sunday morning Ethan could have described. Pancakes and coffee, and a child with slightly uneven braids, and a woman sitting at his kitchen table talking about blueberries with the same attention she brought to everything. He thought about what it had cost him to nearly lose this, the 5 days in his head, the years before that building the box, the version of himself that had stood at his own door and told himself that nothing was happening when everything was already underway. He poured more coffee. He sat back down. Victoria was telling Lily about a building she'd seen in Tokyo that had a garden on the roof, and Lily was asking very specific questions about what grew there, and the morning light came through the kitchen window and made ordinary shapes out of ordinary things. Ethan Cross thought, this is it. This is the thing. Right here. Not a destination, not an arrival point, just this. The particular texture of a life being lived by people who had decided to be present in it. He thought about what he'd told Victoria. I don't know how to want things again. He thought about her answer. You've been wanting things for 5 months and putting them away. She'd been right. She was often right, which was something he was getting used to with the same gradual acceptance he gave to most true things. He was not going to put this away. March became April the way seasons do in Ohio. Slowly and then all at once. The cold retreating in stages, complaining the whole way. The trees on Caldwell Street started doing what trees do in spring, which Lily monitored with daily updates like a scientist tracking a variable. The one by the mailbox has buds, she reported over breakfast on an unremarkable Tuesday. I noticed, Ethan said. Victoria's tree has more buds. Different kind of tree. I'm going to tell her. She reached for her fork. She'll want to know. He watched his daughter eat her cereal and thought about the way children accept change. Not all change. Lily had opinions about routine, had required 2 weeks of adjustment when the after-school pickup shifted. But the good kind of change, the kind that built, she accepted the way she accepted. Most things she decided were simply how things were now. Victoria was part of how things were now. She'd made that determination somewhere around month 2 and had been operating on it steadily since. Adults were worse at this. He was worse at this. He knew it. He was working on it. The first time Ethan and Victoria went somewhere alone, just the two of them, without Lily, which felt significant in a way he tried not to overthink, and overthought anyway. It was to a Vietnamese restaurant 40 minutes from Millbrook that she'd read about somewhere and wanted to try. It was a Friday night. Lily was at a sleepover at her friend Danica's house, which she had been anticipating since before it was confirmed, packing a bag 3 days early. Ethan had dropped her off at 5:30 and came home to a house that was quiet, in the way it was only quiet when Lily wasn't in it, which was a different kind of quiet than other quiets. He stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes, changed his shirt twice, told himself it wasn't a big deal, and was ready at 6:15 when Victoria knocked. She was in a dark blue jacket he hadn't seen before, hair down, and she looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him, that direct, specific attention, and said, "You changed your shirt." No. You have a different shirt than this morning. This morning was a work shirt. The other one was fine. This one is also fine. Both shirts are fine, she said. I'm just noting. He locked the door with the handle trick, which he had fully internalized by now without thinking, and they walked to his truck in the mild April evening, and he opened the passenger door, and she got in without comment, and he went around and got in the driver's side and started the truck. This is different, he said. Dinner? Dinner. Us. This specific thing. She looked at the windshield. It's different, she agreed. Is it okay? He looked at her. Yeah, he said. It's okay. He pulled out of the driveway. They drove through Millbrook's end-of-day traffic, which was not dramatic traffic, but was sufficient to give both of them something to look at while they found their conversational feet in this new configuration. By the time they reached the highway, she'd started telling him about a call she'd had that day, a board member who'd pushed back on a decision she'd been building toward for 3 months, and the frustration in her voice was real, and she wasn't managing it down. And by the time they reached the restaurant, he'd suggested 2 possible approaches, and she'd told him one was wrong and explained why, and he'd conceded the point because she was right. It felt, he thought, like every other conversation they'd had in the kitchen. But with the highway in the window and the darkness coming in around the edges and his truck cab between them and the world. He held the restaurant door open. She walked through. She didn't comment on it, and neither did he, because neither of them needed to perform the gesture or acknowledge it. They ordered too much food. This was because the menu was constructed to make you order too much food, and also because Victoria approached a restaurant menu the way she approached most things, thoroughly, with intent to understand the full range of options before committing. Ethan let her lead on it because watching her evaluate a menu was unexpectedly entertaining, and he was in no hurry. The FHO arrived first. Lily would have been very interested in it. She would have had questions, Victoria said when he said this. 15 minutes of questions minimum. About the broth specifically. She'd want the sourcing information. Victoria smiled. It was the real smile, the small one that reached further than the wide one. She's going to be something. She already is something. Even more something then. He looked at his bowl. She told me she likes it when you're here. Victoria was quiet. She doesn't say things she doesn't mean, he said. She's not a diplomatic kid. She likes what she likes, and she tells you. I know. Quiet. I like being there. A pause. I like both of you as a... She stopped. As a unit. As a thing. He looked up. She was looking at him with the particular expression he'd started to recognize as her version of unguarded. The moments when the strategic layer came down and it was just her thinking out loud, without a plan yet for what to do with the thought. We're a complicated unit, he said. I'm aware. I have a 7-year-old who will interrogate you about the geopolitics of her snow map countries at any given moment. I find that reasonable. She has opinions about hairstyle construction. Her opinions are usually correct. She'll want you at school things, permanently. I know, Ethan. He looked at her. I just want to make sure you're... I'm sure, she said, simply. I've been sure about this longer than you have. You catch up, I'll wait. He looked at her for a moment. He thought about what that cost her to say, not the vulnerability of it specifically. She wasn't a woman who leaked vulnerability, but the directness of it, the willingness to be plainly, unmistakably clear about what she wanted. He thought about how long it had been since someone had looked at him, specifically, and been that clear. I'm caught up, he said. She held his eyes for a beat. Then she picked up her chopsticks. Good, she said. Eat your foe. At them. Spring moved forward. The routine that had been assembling itself over winter became something more intentional, less accidental, more chosen. Victoria reorganized her schedule so that her on-site Columbus work was clustered into 3 days a week, which meant she was home on Caldwell Street more often than she wasn't. This was a logistical decision she made without announcing it as a significant thing because she was not a person who dramatized her choices. Ethan noticed. He didn't say anything about it either. They were both, it turned out, people who preferred to let actions carry the weight rather than pointing at them. He went to her house now, not just the other way around. This had required a small internal negotiation he'd had to have with himself, because there was something vulnerable about crossing the distance rather than receiving it, about going toward instead of being arrived at. He'd had the negotiation, recognized it for the old reflex it was, and knocked on her door on a Tuesday evening in April with a container of chili he'd made too much of again. She'd taken it. She'd looked at him for a second and she'd said, "You're making too much chili on purpose now." "Jury's still out," he said. She'd stepped back from the door. "Come in." And he had. That was when it shifted into something that had a shape he could name. It wasn't simple. He wanted to be honest about that, at least to himself. There were things to figure out that weren't solved by a kitchen conversation, however true it had been. Victoria's life had a scale to it that was genuinely different from his. There were work trips, events, a world of professional obligations that she managed with practiced efficiency, but which existed outside anything Ethan had experienced navigating. There was a night in May when she came home from a week in New York at 11:30 on a Thursday, and he'd texted her about something small, and she hadn't responded until the next morning, and he'd spent the gap doing the old thing, building the case, filing things away, talking himself down from wanting what he wanted. She'd called him the next morning, not texted, and had said, "I was in a dinner that ran 4 hours and then I was asleep before my phone hit the charger. I'm sorry I didn't respond." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I wanted to, because I noticed you went quiet, and I know what that usually means for you, and I wanted to say specifically, it wasn't that." He'd held the phone and looked at the kitchen ceiling. "I did the thing," he said. "You did the thing." "I'm aware." "I know." She paused. "I'm going to be away sometimes, for work. That's real. I need you to tell me when the quiet thing is happening instead of just going into it. That requires me to admit I'm doing it." "Yes?" she said. "That's the requirement." He exhaled. "Okay." "Okay?" she said. "I'll be home tonight." She was. She brought food from a place in Columbus she'd stopped at on the way back, and Lily interrogated her about New York with the focused energy of someone researching a travel destination. And they ate at the kitchen table, and nobody said anything about the 11:30 or the quiet, because the conversation on the phone had been the actual conversation, and this was just them being home. He thought about what it meant, someone saying, "I'll be home tonight," and meaning his street, his neighborhood, someone having a place to return to that was, at least in part, about him. He thought about how long it had been since anyone had been coming back to where he was. He cleared the plates. Victoria helped him, which she'd started doing without comment, the natural efficiency of someone who'd decided that a kitchen was a shared space and distributed the work accordingly. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, which happened sometimes on the longer days, and Ethan carried her upstairs with the particular careful competence of a man who'd done it hundreds of times, and when he came back down, Victoria was at the kitchen sink finishing the dishes. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." She didn't stop. He leaned on the doorframe and watched her. He thought about the first month, about filing things away, about the box, about 2 years of building a life that fit exactly what he had, and not one room more. He thought, "I have more rooms now." There was a Saturday in June, warm finally, the Ohio summer arriving with its usual combination of too much humidity and genuine beauty, when Claire called. Not to revisit anything, just logistics. Lily's summer schedule, the weeks she'd be in Cleveland with Claire's parents, the camp Lily had decided she wanted to do in August. A functional conversation. They had functional conversations well by this point. The damage was old and they'd navigated it into something workable. But at the end of the call, there was a pause, and Claire said, "She talks about the neighbor a lot. Victoria." "Yeah," Ethan said. "Lily likes her." "She does." Another pause. He waited. "Are you—" Claire stopped. "Is it—" "Yeah," he said. "Simple." He heard something on her end that he couldn't identify. Not jealousy, or not primarily, something more complicated. The sound of a person recalculating. Good, Claire said finally. She said it like she meant it, and also like it cost her something to mean it. He understood that. He didn't require her to say more. I'll talk to Lily about the camp, he said. Okay. A pause. Ethan. Yeah. I said some things when I was there, in your kitchen. Her voice was careful. I said them because, Claire, he kept his voice even. It's okay. I don't know if it is. I'm okay, he said. That's what I mean. You can let it go. A beat. Okay, she said. He hung up. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. He thought about what it felt like to say that and mean it. I'm okay. Without any performance in it. Without the 60-40 split. Without the part of him quietly arguing the other direction. He was okay. He was actually, specifically, in this particular life, on this particular Saturday in June, okay? He went outside. Victoria was on her porch with her laptop, working in the Saturday morning way she sometimes worked when the weather was good, because she'd discovered that the porch was better than any office for the particular kind of concentration that didn't require a screen. She looked up when he came out. Everything good? She said. Claire called. Summer schedule stuff. Lily's camp? Among other things. He sat on the front step, his own front step, but angled toward her porch, which had become a natural geography. She asked about you. Victoria raised an eyebrow slightly. Not in a complicated way, he said. Just acknowledged you exist. Progress, Victoria said. It is, actually. He looked at the street, the Saturday quiet of it. A neighbor 2 houses down mowing, the particular smell of cut grass finding its way over. She said something that I used to think was true, he said. About me. About who I was and what I was capable of. Victoria put the laptop aside. She was looking at him. And for a long time, he said, I organized my whole life around the idea that she was right. I didn't do it consciously. I just built accordingly. Small. Managed. Nothing that required me to reach. She didn't say anything. She knew this part, but she also knew he needed to say it. And the thing is, he said, I think I needed to hear it from you more than I understood. What you said in the kitchen that night. He looked at her. That she needed me to be what she described. So her story made sense. I don't think I'd ever let myself think about it that way. Had it helped? She said. Hearing it? Yeah, he said. It helped, but not because it fixed anything. More like it gave me back the right to reassess. She nodded. That was the right word for it. I've been wrong about myself, he said. Not about everything, but about the part that said I was someone things happen around instead of someone they happen to. He looked at the street again. I checked out of the marriage. That part was true. I became someone who maintained instead of built, but that wasn't a permanent condition. That was a person under a specific kind of pressure making bad choices. Those aren't the same thing. No, Victoria said. They're not. I know that now. He looked at her. I know it because you showed up and kept showing up, and the person you saw wasn't the diminished version. You saw the version that was just me. And that was enough for you. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face that was real and open in the specific way it was only open with him. More than enough, she said. He held that. He let it be true. He let himself receive it without immediately arguing it back down. I'm still figuring things out, he said. I want to be honest about that. I still have the thing where I go quiet, and I have to remind myself to say it out loud. Ethan. Yeah. I know, she said. I'm not expecting someone who has it all worked out. I never was. What were you expecting? She thought about it genuinely, which he'd learned was how she approached every question worth asking. Someone who showed up, she said, all the way, not just for the easy parts. She paused. You show up. You showed up for Lily every day for 2 years before I ever appeared. You showed up for your job. You showed up for the neighbors you barely knew by keeping your little porch and your shovels and being a person other people could count on. She looked at him directly. I wanted someone who knew how to do that, because the men I'd known before you knew how to be impressive. They didn't know how to just be there. He sat with that, the whole of it, the accumulated weight of it pressing on something in him that hadn't been pressed on in a long time. You could have told me any of that, he said, earlier. You needed to be ready to hear it. You were waiting for me to be ready. I told you, she said. Strategic. He looked at her for a second. Then he did something he hadn't planned. He laughed. A real one, from somewhere in his chest that had been tight for a long time. She smiled, the real smile, the deep one. And he shook his head and looked at the street and felt something that he would later try to describe and not quite find the right word for. Not relief, not happiness exactly, more like arrival. The feeling of finally being in the place you were supposed to be, having taken too long a route to get there, but being here now, and here being genuinely, specifically good. Lily found out they were official, the word she used, with the authority of someone who had read about this concept and was prepared to apply it. When she came home from Donica's sleepover in June and found them on the back porch with 2 coffees and a book that was passing back and forth between them, each of them having opinions in the margins. She stood in the back door and assessed this situation for approximately 2 seconds. Oh, she said. Good. We need to talk about this, Ethan said. I've known since December, Lily said. Lily, we didn't even… December, she confirmed, and went inside to find a snack. Ethan stared at the back door. Victoria was looking at the middle distance with her coffee mug held in both hands, and the expression of someone genuinely trying not to laugh. December, he said. She noticed things, Victoria said, with complete innocence. She's 7, almost 8. That doesn't… You can't notice that in December there was nothing to… The way you shoveled my driveway, Victoria said mildly. She was watching from the window. He looked at the back door. He looked at Victoria. He looked at the back door again. She has very good instincts, he said finally. She told me I should be a diplomat. She was right, Ethan said. She's usually right. There was a day in July when something happened that he would later think of as the moment it became fully, completely real, in a way that lived in his body and not just his head. It was a Sunday afternoon, and it was hot, the genuine Ohio summer heat that sat on everything like a hand. They'd driven to a state park an hour south, Lily's request, sustained for 2 weeks until executed, and walked a trail through the trees to a shallow creek where Lily had waded in immediately up to her shins with her shoes still on, which she was informed was unacceptable and which she accepted as a fair consequence. They'd sat on the bank. Victoria had her feet in the water, her shoes off, her work laptop blessedly absent. Lily was staging a drama involving 3 sticks she'd named. Ethan was watching the tree line and thinking about nothing in particular, which was something he was getting better at. The nothing in particular mode, the one that required a certain basic trust that the world was not about to require something from you. Victoria leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder. Not a gesture, not a thing for anyone else, just… because the bank was warm and it was summer and this was where they were. He put his arm around her. Lily looked up from her stick drama, assessed this, and returned to her drama. Normal. Part of how things were. He sat with the creek and the heat and the sound of Lily naming the sticks and the weight of Victoria's head on his shoulder. He thought about the morning on his porch with his coffee, looking at the driveway. The accumulated nothing of a life that fit exactly what it was. He thought about the version of himself who had stood in his kitchen on a Thursday night telling himself the box was still closed. He thought, the box was never really closed. He had been, the whole time, wanting this. He had built the box to not want it, and maintained the box to not want it, and the box had been, the whole time, a fiction he was telling himself to stay safe. And underneath the fiction, wanting, just wanting. He thought about what Victoria had said in the kitchen. You've been wanting things for 5 months and putting them away. He thought, longer than that? He thought, it's fine. I'm here now. There were still hard days. He wanted to be honest about that too, because the story of a life isn't the story of its best hours. There was a Tuesday in September when he lost his patience with Lily over homework. Genuinely lost it, snapped at her over a math worksheet that was genuinely frustrating and also not the real reason. The real reason being that he'd had a bad week at work, and he'd brought it home in exactly the way he'd promised himself he wouldn't. She'd gone to her room quiet in the way that hurt worse than if she'd been angry. He'd stood in the hallway outside her room for 10 minutes. Then he'd knocked and gone in and sat on the edge of her bed and said, "I was wrong to snap at you. I was frustrated about something else and I put it on you, and that wasn't fair." Lily had considered this with the seriousness she gave to real apologies. "It's okay," she said. "It's not okay. I can do better than that." "I know you can," she said. "That's why it's okay." He'd sat there for a minute more. Lily had picked up her book. Then she'd said, without looking up, "You should tell Victoria when you're having a hard week. She can't help if she doesn't know." He'd looked at his daughter. "When did you get this wise?" "I've always been wise," she said. "You just started listening." He had, in fact, texted Victoria from the hallway. She'd called him back in 10 minutes and talked with him for 45, not solving anything, not performing comfort, just there, present, which was all he'd actually needed and which she'd understood without him saying so. Afterward, he'd thought about what Victoria had said in April, "Tell me when the quiet thing is happening instead of just going into it." He was still learning that. It didn't come naturally, the telling. He had built years of infrastructure around the not telling, but he was practicing it. That was the thing nobody told you about changing a pattern. It didn't become automatic. You had to choose it, specifically and repeatedly, even when the old way was right there and felt easier. You had to keep choosing it until one day you noticed it was slightly less hard than it had been last month, which wasn't the same as easy, but was the thing you could build on. He was building on it. The following October, a year since the moving truck, a year since the voice from the sidewalk and the door trick and the beginning of everything, they carved pumpkins on Ethan's front porch on a Saturday afternoon. This was Lily's annual undertaking, treated with the significance it deserved. She had a system. She selected her pumpkin at the farm stand in late September, transported it home with the care of someone transporting something irreplaceable, and spent approximately 10 days deciding on the face before committing. This year she had decided on 3 pumpkins. One for her, one for Ethan, one for Victoria. "You're deciding my pumpkin's face?" Ethan said. "You always make the same face," Lily said. "I'm branching you out." Victoria looked at him. "What face do you make?" "Apparently the same face every year." "It's a fine face," Lily said generously, "but limited." Victoria was given a surprised face. "Happy surprised," Lily specified. "Not the bad kind." "I know the distinction," Victoria said. "Just checking." They sat on the porch in the October afternoon, all 3 of them, with their pumpkins and their tools and the slight bite of fall in the air that Ohio did well. Lily directed, Ethan executed. Victoria was better at this than either of them anticipated, which she attributed to a misspent afternoon at a company team-building event, and which Lily declared was an excellent use of corporate time. Ethan sat on the porch step and looked at the 3 pumpkins lined up at the edge. Lily's creative vision, his branched-out version, Victoria's happy, surprised face. He thought about last October. He thought about the quiet of this porch before Lily's voice and the pumpkin debate was the main sound. He thought about all the distance between then and this. Not clean distance, not the kind you travel without bruises, the kind that has specific weight, specific cost. A marriage that hadn't worked, 2 years of building small, 5 months of the box, and the filing away, and the not quite believing. Claire's words in the kitchen, and the 5 dark days after them. All of it. He thought, you have to go through the thing to get to the other side of the thing. There wasn't a way around it. There wasn't a cleaner route. You had to live through the bad years and the careful years and the years of keeping everything manageable until the thing you were protecting yourself from turned out to be the thing you needed most. And then you had to find the courage to stop protecting and start choosing. He'd done it slowly, later than he should have, with more backward steps than forward ones on certain days. But he'd done it. Victoria was sitting next to him on the porch step, close enough that their shoulders touched, looking at the three pumpkins with the same expression she gave to anything she'd decided was worth her full attention. "Happy surprised," she said. "Yeah. It's a good face." Lily was right about it. She usually is. Lily was carrying her pumpkin inside with the care of someone transporting fine art, narrating its debut as a domestic object to no one in particular. The street was quiet. A neighbor walked a dog at the end of the block. The trees were doing the October thing, going yellow and orange in the unhurried way of things that know they have time to be beautiful. Victoria turned to look at him. He turned to look at her. "You good?" she said. He thought about the question. He turned it over the way he turned things over, looking for the honest answer. "Yeah," he said. "Actually good. Not managing. Not maintaining." He paused. "Just, yeah." She looked at him for a moment. That quality of attention, landing on him, specific and clear. "Me too," she said. He took her hand. She let him. They sat on the porch in the October afternoon with the pumpkins at the edge and the sound of Lily inside making decisions about window placement and the street going about its quiet Saturday and the life that had assembled itself out of orange juice and snow shovels and a door that needed the handle trick continuing to be, without fanfare, real. He thought about what his daughter had said, that first fall. "She looks at you like she means it." He thought about everything it had taken to believe that. The years before, the careful years, the box that wouldn't close, the morning in the kitchen when he'd finally said okay and meant it all the way down. He thought, this is what it costs and this is what it's worth, and both things are true. He thought, you were worth choosing. You were worth choosing the whole time. He held that thought. He let it be his. He sat on his porch on Caldwell Street in Ohio in October, with the woman he loved beside him and his daughter inside conducting important business with a pumpkin, and he didn't put a single thing away. He just sat there, fully there, and let it be enough and more than enough and everything.